Thank you very much, Debbie, and good morning to everybody. Thank you to everybody watching online. I am your chair for this morning's Standards Committee meeting on the morning of Thursday, the 16th of January, 2025. I'd like to welcome anybody who is watching our live stream. And we're now going to start by doing a roll call of committee members present, for which I'm going to hand over to our DSO, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So I'll go through the list in full, and if our district councillors can let me know if you've got any declarations to make at the same time, that'd be really helpful. I'll start with you, Chair. Councillor Eleanor Rylance.
Present, no declarations, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On to our Vice Chair, Councillor John Loudon.
Present, Debbie, thank you, and no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Jessica Bailey is on her way, so we'll talk to her in a bit. Councillor Ian Chubb, good morning, Ian.
Yeah, good morning, President. I declare I'm a Devon County Councillor.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Councillor Tim Dumper. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Debbie. Thank you. Present here. I don't think I have any declarations, but I will make anything if anything comes along as we go along.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Councillor Stuart Hughes. Good morning, Stuart.
Morning, Debbie. Declare an interest on item 11 as a Devon County Councillor.
Thank you very much. Moving on to our other members of the committee. Diana Kerr. Good morning, Diana.
Yes, present and no declarations.
Thank you very much. On to Patrick Coulter. Good morning.
Morning, present.
Thank you. Next to Robert Wood. Good morning.
Good morning, present.
Thank you. On to Martin Goscombe. Good morning, Martin.
Yep, present and no declarations.
Thank you very much. On to Ken Bryant. Good morning, Ken.
Morning, present, no declarations.
Thank you, Ken. On to Serena Sexton. Good morning, Serena.
Good morning, present and no declarations.
Thank you. And I can see that Pauline Stott has entered the room, so I'll just confirm that she's present and get her logged in shortly. Chair, back to you. I can confirm that we're correct.
Thank you very much. And I, at this point, I'm just going to notify the committee of a change of running order in that we're swapping items 10 and 11. So obviously in your agendas, item 11 is item 11, but we will be taking that one first. Thank you. Right. Do we have any apologies, Debbie? We don't have any apologies. Do we have any apologies? I know that Councillor Jess Bailey is on her way, but I don't believe we have any apologies. I think Debbie will advise in a moment if we do. Right, agenda item 4, public speaking. I don't believe there are any members of the public registered to speak. So moving on to matters of urgency, there are no matters of urgency registered. Agenda item 6, confidential or exempt items. There are no confidential or exempt items still, are there?
Minutes.
Okay, perhaps we'll do agenda item 1, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anybody have any comments? Thank you, Vice Chair. Does anybody have any comments or amendments they wish to bring to the minutes? Right, I saw Martin's hand first, please.
Yes, I had two. One was the absence, not for the first time actually, of any reference to the independent representatives and persons who were present at the meeting.
So your presence, okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that, Martin. Thank you.
Could be put on for this occasion.
Yes, I think that's general rule that
when we're present.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the second item, I noted there's a reference in the minutes to the member officer protocol being resubmitted to this committee, and just to ask when that's coming back to the committee.
Thank you. I wonder if can we...
I didn't believe that was the intention. What was, I thought, and I'll be, I thought the understanding was that the comments that the committee had would then go into the constitutional working group. You also asked me to make sure that staff were consulted, so we've been consulting with the unions on that. So the plan is for the draft that you amended to go into the constitutional working group, and then it will go into full council for final sign-off. So that was my understanding, but if I've got anything wrong in relation to that, Debbie, you weren't here, were you?
I think that was my understanding as well, and I think that, was it you, Martin, who was proposing to work with the Constitutional Committee on certain aspects of it?
Sorry, I was simply echoing the resolution, number 1 in the resolution, which was that the Constitution Working Group would review the document and be requested to resubmit to the Standards Committee.
Yeah, I don't know
Nothing
why
more
that's
than
there.
that.
Okay, that's a really good amendment. Thank you very much for
Yeah,
bringing that, because
yeah.
actually that's probably doesn't represent what was actually decided at the meeting. Maybe it shouldn't be standards, maybe it should be
I mean, unless the
constitutional.
committee want me to bring it back for information in terms of what then is agreed by full council, which I'm more than happy to do. But yeah, I'll leave it for members to comment.
Oh, Robert, sorry, Robert, can you remember? Oh, sorry, Martin, can you put your microphone off? Yeah, thank you.
Just to confirm that, yes, my understanding from the meeting was that it wasn't going to come back and that it's the minutes that are wrong rather than the other
So
way around.
that is an amendment we need to bring to the minutes then, isn't it? Thank you very much, Martin.
Apologies, I should pick that up. So
Diana, you had your hand up as well, please.
Same point about the fact we were all present at that meeting.
Okay, yeah. So I think, is easy enough to pull up an attendance sheet, isn't it, and add all the independent members to the meeting? Yeah, thank you. Fantastic. That will be updated. And thank you very much for that crucial amendment. Pauline, did you have your hand up? Would you like to, have you been asked already about your declarations? Any potential declarations of interest? No. Not formally. So, Debbie, can you put your microphone on, please, Pauline?
Sorry, I missed Mel's, your message yesterday. I didn't get it till late last night, but I did reply to it.
I haven't seen that reply, so I'll look for it now.
It was about 10 o'clock last night, so.
So, Pauline, do you have any declarations of interest to make on anything on the agenda? Okay, thank you. That's not going to be relevant to anything on today's agenda, I don't think. And anyway, it's probably in your ROI. Morning, Jess. Right, so with that one crucial amendment, are there any other amendments or modifications that you think should be brought to these minutes? Morning, Jess. Yeah. I'll just let you log in and then I'll ask you if you have any declarations of interest. We'll be needing this on the video, please.
The only declaration I have is that I'm one of the dual-hatted members referred to in one of the reports.
Yes, so I have established with the monitoring officer that councillors Hughes, Chubb and you should not vote on this item.
That's fine.
The decision has been made by the monitoring officer already because she is allowed to, but we are talking about it, but you should not take part in the vote.
That's fine, thank you.
The other thing that you need to know is that we have swapped over items 10 and 11 for logistical purposes. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Are you happy to accept those minutes on that basis with the amendment brought, well, the two amendments, the presence and the amendment brought by Martin? If you are in favour, could you please, voting members, please raise your hands now. You are allowed to vote on this, Ian, if you want to, this one. Yeah, okay, thank you very much, everybody, that's unanimous. It's only former item 11 that you can't vote on. Everything else you can vote on. So the thing that actually specifically concerns dispensations, you will not be able to vote on. Right. Agenda item 7, and I think for this we're handing over to Mel. Thank you very much.
So at the last committee, I promised to bring you a slightly tweaked version of the presentation that I did to the Devon Association of Local Councils sort of conference for all towns and parishes. So I've updated it really to just give some thought about how we can continue to try and nip complaints in the bud, both with the assistance of all towns and parishes, but also with the assistance of our ward members as well, who often are obviously alert to issues that may be occurring before perhaps it gets to the monitoring officer. So I'll just take you through the presentation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of ethical standards in public life. Obviously, my role in addressing complaints that come in, the limitations of that role, so what I can do and what I can't do, and how district councillors and town and parish councils can help in that. So in terms of the importance of ethical standards, I know you as a committee are the one committee that absolutely know the importance of ethical standards. We've obviously got our 7 principles of public life, and all of our district, town and parishes embody those 7 principles in their codes of conduct. And the reason why ethical standards are so crucial is obviously the trust and confidence. So it helps to build trust and confidence among the public if they see that we, are operating in an ethical way. It's all about accountability and transparency, making sure that we're accountable for our actions and that the decisions that we take. Obviously, better quality of service as well. If we are upholding good ethical behaviour, then the decisions that we make about our services are likely to be much better. So it's all in, the quality of the service is really important. And it's about maintaining that public trust. And also, we've obviously got a legal and moral obligation to act in the public's interest. So something that this committee obviously is key in the role that you have in that. And as I found a quote online, I think it was the LGA, how a service is delivered is as important as what is delivered. So how you get there. And that's why a lot of our complaints are around processes and processes that are followed, and whether those processes are flawed, and whether they were fair and open and transparent. Okay, next slide, please. So my role, as you know, in addressing complaints is about promoting and maintaining those high standards, training members on standards. And just to let you know, we're going to be doing another training session for our district councillors on code of conduct and a few town and parish councillors in the next month. So we're continuing to make sure that members are appropriately trained. Obviously, I'm the principal advisor to this committee and giving you advice in relation to that issue. And then obviously the key part is receiving and processing code of conduct complaints. And when I say receiving and processing, that's probably the latter part. It's the part that we do before those complaints come in, hopefully, or when those complaints come in, about trying to resolve issues and make sure that councillors can move forward and members of the public can move forward together in a positive way. So obviously, advising on the complaints process, acknowledging complaints, assessing those complaints and consulting with members is obviously a key part of what I do in that role. Okay. Next slide, thank you. So, as you know, I work very closely with the independent persons in that role and deciding on whether any complaints have merits, and making a decision on whether we should take no further action, other action, or refer for formal investigation. Luckily, in most cases, no further action is taken because we do get complaints where actually there are not code of conduct breaches. Other action, I would say, is a very key thing nowadays in terms of trying to work. Is it a training issue? Is it a breakdown in relationships? Other action is really important in our sort of toolbox of helping individuals to move forward. Referring for formal investigation is obviously the majority, because that is where you have the most serious cases, and thankfully we don't have many serious cases, but obviously it's very critical where there has been potentially a significant breach that we have that ability to refer things for formal investigation. You'll all be aware of the process for that, in appointing an independent investigator and reviewing the findings of that investigator. And obviously, from time to time, you may need to conduct a hearing, which obviously I know you will have done in the past, but we've not done for some time since I've been here. So then moving on to the next slide and the limitations of the monitoring officer role. This is where we spend quite a lot of time advising members of the public about, what monitoring officers can and can't do. So we can't intervene where it's about a member of staff, and we do get quite a lot of complaints about members of staff coming in through the Code of Conduct complaints process. But clearly that is not something for that process. That is an internal potential disciplinary process that is not dealt with by us as a council in terms of the monitoring officer role. A large number of the complaints that we get are also about the day-to-day running of a council. So in town and parish council terms, often we get complaints about the decisions that are taken by a town and parish, and therefore we have to explain that actually it's not our role to get involved in the decision making of towns and parishes. That is purely within the jurisdiction of towns and parishes. It is only about the behaviour of members, that we have a role to play. Also that the decisions are taken. So we do get complaints about decisions that are taken. A number of those are about planning decisions. So again, we have to educate members of the public that our role is not to intervene. We have no power to intervene in those decisions. And therefore that is not a route for a code of conduct complaint. We also have quite a number of complaints about members' behaviour in their personal life. And I do understand members of the public believe that if you are an elected councillor, that you should behave in a certain way, but that is about a member's behaviour in that public life, not in their personal life. But we do have members of the public that feel that just because they are a member, that in their personal life they should be behaving in a certain way as well. So we do get complaints about that. But clearly the legislation is very clear. A code of conduct is only about a member's behaviour in their professional capacity or as a member, or when they are acting or giving the perception that they are acting as a councillor. Things that have happened too long ago as well. So we've got a criteria in our code of conduct complaint procedure that if something has happened more than 6 months ago, that potentially that is not something that would be considered by this committee or by myself as monitoring officer. And that's obviously really important because memories fade, and ultimately if you're trying to do an investigation about something that was 2 years ago, the witnesses may well struggle to recollect accurately exactly what happened. So our procedures model the LGA procedures, and also the Ombudsman, who also doesn't look at things generally that are too long ago as well. So moving on then to probably the most important part of this presentation, which is about how district councillors and town and parish councils have a key role in helping us to prevent complaints escalating. So the first one really is about acting before a situation escalates. So that's a key one for me. All of the members in here, the elected members, will attend meetings of councils, whether that's town and parishes, district councils. If they see breakdowns in relations, whether that's between councillors on the council or between members of the public and the council, it's often useful for me to be aware of that so that we can try and get in and try and nip those in the bud. I can give advice to town parish clerks, to individuals about, is mediation appropriate? Are there any discussions that can be taken place between those individuals to try and resolve an issue at an early stage? So, acting before a situation escalates is probably the key one for us about, getting in there early. Open dialogue is really important, that regular communication between members and the monitoring officer, between town and parish councils and the monitoring officer. The one area that, I wish I always had more time for is those relations with town and parish clerks, and I would like to do more. I don't necessarily have the capacity to do that, but between myself and Katie, we always try and make ourselves available for town and parish clerks so that we can have those discussions, we can, have that open dialogue to help support towns and parishes about, how can we together resolve these issues at an early stage. So that's really important. It's also, again, and this is one I really emphasised in the presentation at the DELT conference, is about understanding my role and the lines of what I can be involved in. So I do often see parish clerks or town clerks just referring any issue directly, saying to a member of the public, you need to go straight to the monitoring officer. It's really important for them to understand where we can help and intervene and where we can't. So where I've talked about, if it's about a member of staff, if it's about decision making within the town or parish council, it's really important that clerks understand that as well. So that's why I wanted to sort of spread that word, because obviously clerks come from different experiences, different, lengths of service. They will all have different knowledge in that area. Some will have gone through the certificate in local council administration, so will have, quite an in-depth knowledge. Others may not have undertaken that certificate. So, so there will be differing levels of knowledge. So making sure that we continue to raise awareness, and what I would suggest is on the back of this presentation that we put something in the town and parish council newsletter, just reminding everybody about the role of the monitoring officer and where and when this council can get involved in complaints to do with towns and parishes. Obviously, having a robust internal complaints process is important. We've obviously got a robust code of conduct complaints process because you reviewed it last year. But having a robust internal complaints process in the councils as well. So the normal general complaints process, whether at the district level or at the town and parish level, is really important, so that the public are clear about the distinction about when they complain directly to the town and parish and when they complain to the district council's normal complaints procedure, and when they go through the monitoring officer standards committee code of conduct complaints procedure. So being very clear about that. And I have looked, in the past on towns and parishes, I'm not necessarily talking about in Devon, I'm talking about generally, where it's very difficult to find the complaints procedure on the town or parish council's website, or, it doesn't necessarily follow best practice. So making sure that all councils have a really robust complaints procedure in, so that if it isn't a code issue, if it is about decision making, or if it's about the process that the town or parish has followed, that there's a really good process that members of the public can go through and feel that they have been listened to and heard. Because in my experience, and I know you'll all share this experience, when people feel that they haven't been listened to or heard, that's when they will try and explore every process that they can utilise to try and find an outcome and try and, try and find a solution to the issue that they have. So having robust complaints procedures is really important. And then having those procedures, making sure that those are followed is really critical. We will have all seen examples where an organisation has a complaints procedure, but for some reason they then don't follow that, whether that's, timescales, whether that's the actual process itself. So making sure that that process is followed. Listening follows on nicely from what we were just talking about to the concerns as well. So sometimes I think complainants feel that they haven't been listened to, and therefore that's why they therefore want to explore a formal complaints process. So just taking the time to understand somebody's concerns can often nip things in the bud. Just giving them that time where they can get it off their chest and express why they felt something wasn't right. And often when you then explain, well, actually, we can't resolve the issue in the way that you want to, but they feel they've been listened to, that will often, lead to the issue being, drawing to a close. I think what I would be saying to any council is, particularly where complaints are being made member to member within a council, but also outside, the impact that making a code of conduct complaint has on relationships. So, I've seen many complaints where it is member to member within one organisation. The impact on that has on complaints on relationships moving forward can be really detrimental, and can, for years it can affect an organisation. So making sure that we are considering mediation, that we're considering sitting down with those individuals and trying to nip it in the bud, is really important. And, making sure that people think properly through as to whether the code of conduct process is the right process for the organisation, and making sure that the organisation moves forward in a really, really positive way. And obviously, the last one on there about considering the sanctions or lack of. So a lot of people make complaints because they think they're going to be able to get the member disqualified, suspended. We all know those are not sanctions available to us at present, although, as we know from the next paper, they might become available at some point, but at the moment we don't have the availability of those sanctions. So again, a lot of the complaints that we have come in, we ask them, what are you trying to achieve from your complaint? Often they will say, we want that member suspended, we want them to cease being a town or parish or district councillor. So the first thing that we do is go back and say, we need to manage your expectations here. That's not something that you can achieve. Knowing that, do you still want to go through this process? Because it's no good giving people the impression that there's something at the other end of it that they're not, you know, they think they're going to be able to achieve, but they're not going to be able to achieve. Okay, so next slide. We've talked about mediation. I mean, obviously that can be a formal mediation, but it also can be very informal. It could be a clerk in a parish council sitting down with two members. It could be them asking me to come in and just having a chat with members, or it could be formal mediation whereby we get in a third party at a cost and there is formal mediation. But it's what's really important is that that happens at an early stage and we don't let things escalate, you know, to a stage where, you know, there is much more risk, greater risk of that mediation not being successful because it's been allowed to build up to such an extent. Obviously, being very open and transparent to complainants and in any investigation. So that's what we ensure that, you know, our procedures are very open and transparent about what's involved in the process. What are you looking at if you make a complaint? How long is it going to take? What will be involved? Because again, often people may think this is something that will be resolved within a month. Well, we all know if it goes for a formal investigation that we're talking many, many months, and people need to understand that that impacts whether they're the complainant or the member. That affects both parties in terms of having that hanging over your head for that length of time. Training sessions, obviously key, and you know, we know that, and obviously we try and make sure that we keep all of our members as trained as we can, and promoting that awareness amongst council members and staff about ethical behaviour. That will be an important part of the chair's annual report that goes into council, for example, and also when the chair comes in to meet with our group leaders to promote ethical standards. And Eleanor and I have had a discussion about potentially on the back of this presentation bringing something into our group leaders meeting here just to again promote the importance of ethical behaviour and how all of their members can assist us in that process. Obviously, we have the situation at the moment whereby we can't impose sanctions on towns and parish councils. We can only recommend sanctions. So I've personally had experience, not here, but in another location whereby a town and parish were recommended to impose certain sanctions on a member, and they, in fact, on a number of members of their parish council, and they didn't. And you can't overemphasise the fallout that created within the electorate in terms of them seeing that the Standards Committee had made a decision that this member or members should have, you know, whether it was undertaking training or doing mediation, whatever it was, giving an apology, whatever it was, that then the parish council didn't uphold that, and therefore the individual did absolutely nothing and didn't comply with those sanctions. That can be really detrimental to the reputation of that authority. So again, our next paper, obviously that's again something the government are thinking about, or something that I've flagged up in the consultation response, because actually they haven't mentioned it, and I think it's something key that they do need to think about. And then finally, I've touched on complaints procedures and making sure that they're up to date, but also all policies and procedures. So making sure any policies around ethical standards and behaviour, it's really important that they're up to date, robust, and making sure that they align with legal and ethical standards. and just engaging with the public to understand their concerns, which sort of touches on some of the stuff that I've already mentioned. So I think all of those things are really key in how our district councillors in town and parishes can assist us. So I've waffled on to you a lot there. So really, it was just to open up a discussion about, you know, anything you as members of the committee with all your wealth of experience feel that we should be doing, or anything else that we can be promoting.
Thank you, Melanie. And I know that some of the independent members are also parish councillors.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, I know you're going to put it into the town and parish newsletter. Could it maybe also go into the member newsletter?
Yes, definitely.
Because I think
Definitely.
we as members
Yes.
will play a crucial role in disseminating this information to some of our parishes, which may not be so connected with district council as others. Right, so does anybody have any questions for Melanie or any comments they want to make to any of this or amendments? Serena, could you please express what you want?
I just wanted to ask Melanie if you actually felt that mediation should be a requirement in the family court. Obviously, people who come before the family court, they have to go through mediation, and it's a requirement for that to be considered. There may be very good reasons why it doesn't take place, you know, all sorts of reasons. I won't go into them, but it is a requirement because to go through the process of having a complaint, you know, from a member's point, is really quite bruising at times. And sometimes, even though it is a breakdown of relationships and it is about sitting together, talking it through, finding out, you know, what's at the core of it before it actually becomes a full-blown formal complaint.
Thank you, Serena. I think I'm a big fan of de-escalation, as you know.
It's absolutely, it's an interesting point, and I can only give a very personal view on this. First of all, I'm an accredited mediator, so obviously I'm a very big fan of mediation. Not that I do any mediations anymore, but so I'm definitely a fan of it. I suppose with my former matrimonial lawyer hat on, which I used to be a number of years ago, I also think there can be an issue that if you try and force people down a route, actually, do you achieve what you're looking to achieve? So it is, you know, I'm a fan of mediation, but I do sometimes things people can just take part in the motions of it just because they're being forced to. But actually, I think mediation is one of those things that people need to be willing to engage in properly. So I'm not really giving you an answer because I'm somewhere in the middle there, and I don't promise to know that answer. But yeah, but I'm sure, you know, others will have views on that.
So yeah, in an ideal world, mediation would be the thing, but you can't force people into mediation, can you? Sorry, Pauline, you had your hand up, please.
Yeah, it's such a shame that when you become a councillor that you only made to go on a code of conduct thing, because I know for a fact in our council not everybody's been on the code of conduct training, and it's up to the individual at the moment if they go on it. It's not
Exmouth Town Council, for the sake of clarity,
but I mean,
yes,
I bet any of the councils, I bet not all the members have been on code of training. You know, and I think it should be a stipulant. If you become a councillor, then you go on the code of training, code of conduct training.
Yeah.
Can I come back in
Yes,
on that?
please,
and
Mel,
it's
do.
a really good point, because obviously a number of codes nowadays say you must undertake your code of conduct training, but of course there is no automatic thing that happens if somebody doesn't. It relies on somebody making a complaint, and a lot of people are not going to want to put themselves forward to make that complaint. So I think you're absolutely right. It's difficult, isn't it? I think if you, within the council, it's really good if you can have procedures in place that sort of make it mandatory. Now, obviously, I mean, if you take a planning committee, it's very easy because you can say you can't sit on planning committee unless you've undertaken your planning training. It's what you do in terms of what can't you do if you don't do your code of conduct training? Can you put anything in place? Now, luckily here, we're quite successful in getting our members through that training, and members take it very, very seriously. But it is a difficult one, and I can understand with the vast range of different towns and parishes, the fact that, you know, many people are, well, all of them are volunteers, people who are very busy in their lives. it is a tricky conundrum, but yeah, absolutely. I do think it should be in a code, but who is going to enforce that in terms of, because it's not a role of a monitoring officer to enforce the code, it's the role of the monitoring officer to deal with complaints about that code, so it relies on someone to make a complaint.
Yes, please do.
Can I just say, in the new consultation that's gone out, could it not be something that we could add to it?
We absolutely can consider that when we get onto, and that's the whole point of bringing it here, to get those thoughts and feelings.
Or that, if you could bring that back into agenda item 8, that would be fantastic, please, because that's, yes, sorry. John.
No, I can't cross you, sorry. Carry on.
No, it's okay. Do you want to?
No.
No, I'd finished.
Martin.
Martin, please.
Yes, I had just one observation to make really on Pauline's point, and the comment I'm going to make slightly straddles into the next agenda item, where we know that the government are looking at revisiting the standards regime. But one solution, and if there's an opportunity for a council or standards committee such as in East Devon to put this forward, looking ahead to the future, it may not be possible now, I'll get to the point, is a proper oath of office for those who are elected to councillor, the role of councillor, so that they are required to literally swear an oath of office that they will comply with the code of conduct, they will live up to the expectations of the community, they will do their best to serve the interests of the community faithfully, and in the event that there is an issue to do with a failure, you know, if I as a member am found to have transgressed in some way or failed, then I will comply with findings of a standards committee. I will attend training. I'm just trying to describe a new way in which people understand as members, as councillors, that when they take that position right at the start, they are signing their lives away to a particular code of behaviour in office. And that seems a logical way.
I think I can preempt what Mel's about to say, Martin, in that we actually already do sign a code, an oath. Mel, please.
It's a bit of both, actually, because actually that's what East Devon does. But the actual template that is used for acceptance of office, they removed the requirement to comply with the Code of Conduct a number of years ago. So East Devon has continued to maintain that practice and that wording, and that other councils may as well. But I don't believe it is in the standard template for an acceptance of office. So I think it's also a really good point and something that could be beefed up more. So.
But I guess that the expectation that we will abide by the Nolan principles is always there, which will include a lot of what you mentioned. But maybe that's something to bring up in item 8 as well, as part of the feedback to the consultation. So thank you for that. Tim, you're next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Eleanor. Yeah, I was just going to say that I was actually unaware of what you've just said, actually, Melanie, about the fact that it's not in the template, because I was quite surprised at what you had to say, Martin, because to my knowledge, that is always a code of conduct, the Nolan requirements, etc., is always what you sign to when you become a town councillor or a district councillor, and I certainly have. And I'd also just like to say, I mean, I'm sure that Pauline in her earlier comments was right, that there are certain individuals on Exmouth Town Council. I don't want to make it parochial because I'm sure it applies to all of us, but this, in our case in Exmouth, just to say, our town clerk and everybody tries to make sure that people do actually attend their code of conduct training, and it is in our declaration of acceptance of office. So we do take it seriously at Exmouth, I'm sure.
I think that's probably what the government consultation is about, isn't it? It's about tightening up on certain things which maybe aren't as enforceable as they could be in view of what subsequently happens. Thank you for that, Tim. Does anybody else wish to comment or say anything on this? Or are we happy to, are we noting this report? We're noting, okay. So we don't need to vote on this, do we? So thank you very much for that, everybody. Moving on swiftly to the opposite, agenda item 8, which is government consultation on changes to the standards regime. Please, over to you again, Mel.
Thank you. Yes, I was just having a little look on the internet just before Christmas and I came across this. And I'm glad I did, because clearly there are a large number of questions in this consultation document and, you know, some really important issues that hopefully could be very positive moving forward. But it's really important that this committee has the opportunity to input into that consultation. So as it says in my report, we've got until the 26th of February to do our response, so we're in good time to respond to that. I've just highlighted the key proposals that are in there. So reintroduction of suspension powers, and I think probably I can anticipate that most people on the committee will be supportive of that. You know, it's a concern that we have had since the localism came in, that serious breaches, that we don't have sufficient sanction and not the ability to impose those more serious sanctions. They're also addressing, and it's something that's been mentioned so many times over the year, about the ability to withhold allowances. And obviously that's something that has just never been an option, but it's very interesting. That's something that people regularly used to raise, and they've obviously picked that up and they are giving consideration to it. They're also talking about bans on access to premises and facilities, but of course local authorities have been doing that for many years. But I'm assuming they're just trying to firm that up to make sure that that is all covered in anything that moves forward. Disqualification, again, something that we used to, or certainly the adjudication panel used to have the ability to do. So now they're talking about the potential for councillors who've been suspended more than once in a 5-year period to face disqualification for up to 5 years. So again, something that, you know, sounds very positive, that where we have got serious offenders, that, you know, it could result in us having the tools to be able to deal with those things. They're also talking about a right of appeal for members subject to suspension decisions. And I have put some views in the consultation response on that. I think it's probably the right time to say that when I've prepared draft responses to the consultation, I've not been thinking of East Devon as an authority. I've been thinking of all authorities across the country, because you know, East Devon is very, very strong. You know, we've got a very strong standards committee. We keep political issues out of decision making, but I'm acutely aware that that may not be the case in every authority. So when I've come up with responses, so for example on suspensions, I have agreed in what I've prepared, you may ask me to change that, I have agreed that I think an ability to appeal that decision is important, because actually if you did find that there were decisions where politics were getting in the way, I think when somebody is being suspended or disqualified, I feel that that's significant enough that they should have the ability to have an appeal. But I don't think it should be an appeal on every decision. I think it is only those suspension or disqualification type scenarios. They're also talking about a national appeals body. Now, my own personal view, and again, I'd be welcome hearing the views of the committee on this, is that I don't think we necessarily need to go back to the days of a standard board for England. I do think that that creates a lot of bureaucracy. I think, you know, that's why you've got the key role that you have to promote ethical standards within this council. So for me, I think it's more about whether you have a tribunal adjudication panel that sits, you know, like you have appeals to a high court, whether there is an appeal mechanism that goes outside of the council. But I personally, but I'll welcome your views, don't feel that they necessarily need to set up another body. The LGA are doing a good job in terms of giving us guidance on the code of conduct and things like that. So I don't see why they can't continue with that important role. But as I say, that's obviously a decision for you to make in terms of how you respond on that. Mandatory Standards Committee is obviously another element that they're talking about, obviously something that we have anyway. And obviously we're very, very lucky to have the input of plenty of independents and town and parish reps that, you know, some councils may not have that level of input. So we're very positive and lucky in that sense. A mandatory minimum code of conduct. I definitely feel that there should be a mandatory code of conduct, because I do think it causes confusion. It definitely causes confusion for me as monitoring officer, where I'm having to give advice on different codes of conduct because not everybody has adopted the LGA code. So I think it would definitely make sense from that point of view. But looking from a member perspective, if you're a dual-hatted or a triple-hatted member, clearly it makes sense that you've got the same code on all the councils that you're on. Otherwise, that just leads to confusion and you're more likely to fall foul of something because perhaps it's slightly different in one of the codes that you're dealing with. They've also raised the issue about interim suspension powers and whether you should be able as a council to impose an interim suspension. I do have some concerns about that before you have an investigation as to whether that is a little bit dangerous to do that, or whether, more importantly, it's getting on with that investigation and getting on with things. But again, we'll come on to that. There's obviously then something in there about empowering victims and making the process so that complainants feel much more comfortable raising complaints and issues. I think that's a really valid point. And is there enough done to support complainants in that process? I like to think that we support people as much as possible by giving them information, but you know, there potentially could be more, because on the more serious cases, you know, complainants can be very adversely affected, can fear ramifications, and at the moment may not come forward because they fear ramifications from that. So I do think there's a very valid point that the government are raising in relation to how we support, you know, victims as well as obviously the members on the other side of it. So I have basically gone through each of the questions, put in a draft response, but I would welcome your views, your comments on those drafts. We've already talked about other things that we might want to add in. I think because of the number of questions, I would suggest that we don't go through them one at a time, but maybe with the chair's agreement that you highlight which ones you want to talk about, and then we can obviously talk about that. And then at the end, perhaps we just pick up whether there's anything we think's not covered that we also want to try and get into a response somewhere. But leave it to you, Chair.
Thank you, Melanie. So I did have one thought, and that's that a few of the questions seem to be specific to the person answering, and I'm just wondering whether this has been disseminated through the organisation for other people to comment on as well, or whether you're doing, as at the moment you appear to be doing a response at an organisational level for us, but it seems like there are some questions which maybe other people could answer as well for themselves.
So in terms of, so basically this is in terms of an organisational response, so an East Devon District Council response. My draft report gets seen by the portfolio holder, gets seen by the chief executive and certain key officers. So they've obviously had the opportunity to see that. But I take it as the role of this committee really to be the final arbiters on what goes back to the government in terms of that. There may be the potential for me to put my own monitoring officer response in, but this is about what do we, as an organisation, you know, what is the corporate response that goes back to this consultation.
So just because you were the person doing the responses, then you'll be answering the more personal questions.
Yeah, and I will have answered them with my experience and my context, but I want to make sure that this is the context of the committee and your views. So we'll absolutely.
So I guess I'll be getting enough of a flavour.
Yeah, we'll be
across
getting the
country.
flavour of your views so that we can go forward with a response that it is your response basically.
Thank you. Okay, so does anybody have any comments or particular questions they want to focus on? Tim, please, and then Pauline.
Thank you, Eleanor. Yeah, two points on this, and they're the ones that Melanie highlighted. The one is on the National Standards Institution. I think it's actually important to have that in place, and I was very disappointed when it was dropped previously, because I think people locally need to feel that there is an outside body that can actually consider on a non-local basis. Because I think that some of these things become very well known locally and people line up with their own views and all the rest of it. Whereas it's useful, I think, to have an objective look at that. I know it's bureaucratic, and I realise that it should only be certain things that are submitted to it, and I agree with what you said on that. The other thing is about what you called, I think, interim suspension there. And as a previous personnel officer, I know it's very important when people are accused of serious things.
Sorry,
like,
Tim, just for a second. The interim suspension questions are questions 26, 27, 28 and 29, 20 and 30.
Yeah.
Just so people can find their way
I'm
on the
just
papers,
concerned that we do have that kind of power, because some of the things that sometimes councillors are accused of are really quite dangerous and intimidating, as you've said. And I think that where that is the case, there needs to be that power to suspend that member on an interim basis.
So you're agreeing with the responses that Melanie's given then?
I agree with
Yes, microphone please, Tim. Did Tim have his microphone on earlier? Have you just turned it on?
Sorry, I've
Okay.
turned it off.
Shall I just come back in?
Yes, please, Mel.
That's okay. So yes, so basically what the questions are saying is that we're supporting powers to suspend on an interim basis, but the commentary that I've put in there at the moment is that these powers should only be used in severe cases and with appropriate safeguards. So yeah, so that was my concern about having those safeguards in place.
I agree with that.
So are you agreeing with the responses that Mel's put, her draft responses?
I'm not sure what, I can't remember what response you put to the
Question
National
26.
Standards Body.
Oh, the national standard. That's what I was
Yeah.
going to ask you. Which
earlier,
question
I
was
think.
that?
Which I was, Melanie was saying that she wasn't really in favour of having a National Standards Body.
Right, so
And I was
that's-
saying that for the reasons I gave, I thought I was.
I think I'm right in
question was that?
saying is that there's, even though it's referred to in all the documents, they don't expressly have a question on should we create a standards board for England equivalent. It's more about should there be an appeal to an external body. So that's where I've then clarified it, that my view was that it should go to some sort of separate adjudication panel, like an appeal mechanism. But that is different, Councillor Dumper, to what you're suggesting, which is an equivalent of a standards board for England. I suppose my concern about having a separate body, one is the cost of having another. The second one is from my experience, there used to be a lot of confusion from members of the public about which did they need to go to, because Standards Board for England dealt with some things and you dealt with some things at the district level. And therefore, I think it would need to be very, very clear about where those lines were so that members of the public understood the process and what they needed to do. So, but again, it's for there isn't an express question on that, but we can build some text in depending on what the views of the committee are.
So the most likely question to answer, to address in that, thank you, John, is question 39, I think. There is a free text box there, which Mel has already populated. If you wanted to amend that with some extra words, maybe, about a national board. But I do take Melanie's point about, where you apply to, because I think there's quite a lot of confusion already about which local authority does what. So having a standards board, which is you don't quite know who to apply to, it would make it possibly complicated. Yes. So Patrick, please. Yeah.
You've got a number of people.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Oh, before Patrick. So there's a number of people.
Mine was
before
on
you.
the same point though.
Okay. Well, on that particular question 39.
Well, it's linked to question 19 as well, because it talks about an independent body in there. So
right.
is
So
that
I
where-
think I will
where we
take.
embed the
I will
comments?
take Patrick's intervention on the specific issue of the independent body, unless other people who want to speak also want to speak about that. No, I'm not saying, I'm not seeing any hands up for speaking on that particular issue. Patrick, can you please make your point
Because
about the
question
independent
19
body?
says, do you think it's appropriate for a standards committee to have the power to suspend members, or should this be the role of an independent body? So that's stretching it to the standards bit. So I think there's a text box in there where we could put the caveat that we just talked about in there as well.
So would we like to amend draft question 19 answers and go to unsure and then populate the text box? Ticking unsure seems to bring up a free text box, doesn't it?
I might be able to get some text in there anyway, so.
Oh, actually, you seem to have been able to add some text. So maybe, is there a free text box with every question, with every answer?
Not everyone, but there are on some, so.
Oh,
there
you
clearly
put
is
your
on that
microphone
one.
on, Mel.
Oh, sorry. Yes, there clearly is on that one.
Okay, so wherever possible, sorry, Ken, is Ken next?
No, you had Pauline, then Jess, then Robert, then Ken.
Oh, I didn't get to Pauline. Ken, do you want to come in on that specific issue? I'm trying to, it would be easy, it would be less complicated to keep it themed so that we can all have the conversation about this thing that seems to be bothering. Ken, is it about this?
It was question 19.
Okay, yes, please then, can you come in now?
It was just a clarification around if the Standards Committee have this power, is this the whole committee or is this nominated people? How would that process work? Who would have that power of suspension? Because, you know, as Tim was saying, it's so important when looking at a situation to say, does this justify suspension? Are we prejudging anything here? So, because there's so many different levels to this, I wondered whether certain people would be nominated to have this power of suspension, whether it would be something considered by the whole committee.
I think, yes, yeah.
I mean, obviously it would be how we set it up and it would depend on what guidance, but I think it would probably work in the same way as the hearing subcommittee, that you would have a subcommittee that would be made up of 3 members with obviously the independent and town and parish input as appropriate that would make that decision. So it would be members of this committee, but not the whole committee.
That would make sense to me.
I suppose if we're responding to a national consultation, we have to bear in mind that not every council is constituted like ours and has a standards committee that operates like this. So although we can answer for ourselves, we may not be representing what actually happens in many other councils. You know, who knows, we may be an example of good practice. And I suspect we probably are.
Can I come in on this?
Yeah, so John, you want to come in on that specific issue? Yeah,
Yes.
please.
Sorry, I'm going to leapfrog over
So
a
we
few
will-
people on
oh,
that, but
we've got a list.
Given what you're doing. My anxiety is that if we're not careful, we're going to be hugely prescriptive in our responses to what are fairly broad questions. And it says, and here what we're saying is, yes, the decision to suspend for serious code of conduct breaches should be for the Standards Committee. That's giving a very broad response. If we then start saying, well, it should then be a subcommittee, you know, I think, and I make this point generally in answer to the other questions, and if I may, I'm going to then pick up on the question 39 issue about the standard, about whether there's a national body. Again, it's a question of, should there be something outside of a council to which someone can appeal? And the answer that Mel has drafted is yes. The question then becomes, by government, well, what should that be and where should it be and how should it be constituted? And I think the point that Mel is trying to put across in the response is, yes, we think there should be an external appeals process. However, it should not be too complicated, bureaucratic, costly, etc. And I think, personally, I think that's the right level of response. But you may feel different.
Thank you, John. I mean, worth bearing in mind that this is a consultation response. We're not creating policy on the hoof. We're not creating constitutional amendments on the hoof. And question 19, thank Mel's face. Question 19 actually is bland enough to actually provide an answer without being prescriptive. You know, obviously other councils will also be answering this consultation, and so all we can do is say what we think would be a good idea, and then they'll compute that with what other councils also say. Right, I'm going to go back on track now with my list.
Pauline.
So I had Pauline first, please.
Thank you.
Jess, then Robert, then Ken.
Mine's question 11, actually. It's about the local authorities publishing annually. Having been through standards for a year, after an appeal and everything else, but the person who did it against me was a member of the public who actually put it all out in the newspapers. And for the whole year, I was the guilty person. And I think there was nowhere in the papers that said I was innocent, even at the end. And I think there should be something in there. If you're not guilty, then you should have something in there to say that you're not
without
guilty,
wanting to
because
get
I
too
think it's awful
specific.
when a member of the public is allowed to, well, it's not allowed to publish.
Pauline.
We published every single fact in the newspaper, you know, and I just think.
Thank you. Just without wishing to be too specific, I know we will
Yeah,
operate in a
no,
very
you know, I
difficult
just
climate
think that
sometimes.
for somebody who's innocent, I think that is not right. And also, what was the other one? Well, number 15 I've covered because I've already done that.
Can we just
Number
pause for a
23
Okay.
about withholding allowances. Yeah, I agree, that's good. But if you're innocent, I should think you should have all those allowances back. You know, because I think, you know, why should you be? just
Yeah, if you're
because
found
somebody's
not
put a
guilty, then you shouldn't be
complaint in,
punished. You shouldn't be punished for
Why
that.
should you lose your allowance if you're
So-
innocent?
So what I'm hearing from your your interventions about the two questions is that you're asking for consideration to be given to people who are subsequently found not guilty of whatever the allegation was, and for them not to lose out and
on their allowances.
on that basis. Yeah.
Can I address them
Quest-
in order,
first
if
one,
I may?
the-
Yeah.
yeah,
So the
please.
first one is more tricky because when, at this initial stage where you've got an allegation and let me just check I'm reading the question. Should list of allegations and any investigation outcomes. So investigation outcomes, I absolutely understand. The difficulty is the vast majority of complaints never get to an investigation. And therefore, they've never actually been fully investigated. So actually, to put anything out there, because it's not been investigated, it's very difficult. And also, you know, I've put, the reason I put this is wrongly, but it happens. If a member is found, you know, if we get a freedom of information request about the number of complaints a member has had in a year, and they've had 10 complaints, sometimes people will assume that because they've had that number of complaints, that actually they've done something wrong, when they may not have. They just may been involved in something that has created a lot of... So my personal view is that we should only be publishing things when they've gone to an investigation outcome. Not when we're at that initial sifting stage. But I do understand your point about it is very difficult when members of the public actually breach confidentiality and go out. The only route then for a member is, I suppose, to go down their own personal legal route in terms of, you know, defamation or whatever, which, you know, is not really an option in many cases. So I do completely sympathise with that point, but I'm not sure that it's an easy solution because many members would not want it publicised that they've had complaints made against them if they've not gone forward. So,
Well, but it's difficult because if you get a member of the public, they can seem to do what they want to that person, and to go through it for a year and to go through an appeal and an investigation for something I was meant to have said was twisted.
Yeah, we do operate in quite a tricky climate sometimes, don't we? And I know that some members of the public are quite fond of resorting to the complaint system.
I suppose for me, Chair, if we can just, perhaps on question 11, because that's the sort of earliest one we're being asked, is whether members can give me a steer on, do they want to leave the answer as it is, or is there anything that they want me to try and get in a free text box as well to go with it?
So
Perhaps
members, Robert, sorry. Pauline, can you switch your microphone off, please?
Oh, sorry.
I think the answer should be no generally, certainly for allegations, but I think where there has been a formal investigation, the outcome should be published irrespective of whether it's guilty or innocent, but only once a full investigation has been done rather than at the earlier sifting and allegation stages.
Thank you, Robert. Who do we have next? I can't.
You had Jess.
Jess, please.
Thank you. I think we need to talk about the fundamental principle of whether suspension is a recourse for the Standards Committee. And I think...
Sorry, which question specifically is
Well,
this?
it's the overarching question about whether there should be any power to suspend. Because from that, everything else flows. And I think
Yes. Yeah, well, so...
Melanie, can I carry on? Melanie kind of said that she envisaged that the committee would probably want to have that power. And I think we need to talk about actually the implications of that. First of all, I think we need to remember that the vast majority of town and parish councils, and I presume that any suspension would impact them as well, are volunteers. They don't get any allowances. They're doing really good things for their community. And I think that increasingly it's difficult to actually get enough people to come forward. And I'm concerned that if there's a power to suspend on top of the other sanctions, that actually that will have a chilling effect on the communities, because already I think, you know, with social media and everything, in my time as being a councillor, which is pretty much not a district council, but around 10 years, I think there's been a shift in the pressures that are put on councillors and the feeling that they are subject to intense scrutiny. And of course, it's right that we're all subject to scrutiny, but actually for our towns and villages and the smaller parishes, you know, having a power to suspend, I'm worried that that will actually put more pressure and decrease people coming forward, when already I think, you know, we should be working to try and increase the number of people that come forward, because ultimately our communities benefit from having really active and full parish and town councils without loads of spaces. So that's my first comment.
Can you just pause at that point, please? We'll try to talk about that particular aspect, which is questions 19 and subsequent, the responses to those. Can you come back with your second point first, so that we can actually see what the rest of the panel thinks about that particular issue? Martin, was that a hand raised just now about this? Yes, please, can you come in? Oh, not on this one. No. Okay, so we're going to try and talk about the suspension aspect and the chilling effect.
About what my concerns
Okay, so Jess,
about suspension.
Okay, so yes, if it's just about suspension, that's fine, please. Okay.
And I think I picked up on another point that Melanie made at the start, which was that actually a lot of people are making complaints because they want that person to be suspended. And I'm worried that actually, if that is a remedy, then that will actually increase the number of complaints, because people will think that, oh, good, I can get that person removed. And that will actually, you know, we're doing, and I can only talk about this authority, but, you know, there's actually not that many complaints. And I am worried that we will see a shift and an increase. So that's another point. I think it's risky because you're effectively relying on standards committees and monitoring officers. And, you know, I've got no issue with our standards committee, but we cannot assume that every standards committee and every monitoring officer is going to be capable of effective decision making for something that's really important, like suspending a councillor. And you cannot underestimate the devastating effect it will have if a poor decision is made. And yes, there's you know, ability to potentially to go to an outside body. But for those of us who've already been subject to complaints, it's hard enough already. And I just think suspension for people who are basically volunteers is quite a strong thing. And I really do see why it's frustrating that the extent of the remedies are quite limited. But when we look at our authority, how many cases are there in the past, I don't know, 10 years, where suspension would even have possibly been you know, a potential or an appropriate remedy. And, you know, then you're talking about subcommittees where there's only 3 people or potentially 3 people, or some smaller committee, and that's risky again still. So I think, you know, there's also the risk that councillors are meant to be effective communicators for their residents, and potentially people who are outspoken are likely to attract more complaints. And there's nothing wrong with being outspoken, and nothing wrong with effectively, you know, standing up for your community. And I'm worried that it will have a chilling effect on that, because, you know, if you're always looking over your shoulder to see if somebody's going to try and suspend you, even though you're doing nothing wrong, then that's another reason why I just think we need to think. I haven't finalised my decision on what I think, but I just think we have to look at not only, you know, is it all inadequate at the moment, but actually could it be made worse by bringing back in a kind of formal suspension right? So
Thanks, thank you for that, Jess. So I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but it does say in question 18, serious code of conduct breaches. I do wonder whether we need to explore within the consultation what that could actually mean, what a serious code of conduct breach is, because so that specious complaints cannot be made in order to have a person suspended, albeit temporarily until reinstatement, as just a way of making their lives harder for a short period of time. So I think it might be worth asking within the consultation what actually a serious code of conduct breach actually is, and how that could be better defined. Ken, is this about this?
Martin put his hand up.
Martin, is this about this? Okay, Martin first then, please, and then Ken.
It's a really difficult issue, this, and I think Jessica makes some excellent points. For the purposes of the consultation, where we're being asked at 18 explicitly, should councils be given the power to suspend, the draft answer that's given, which is yes, seems actually right, because that seems the right way forward, but there are all sorts of caveats around it, which probably this product doesn't really enable us to get into that level of detail. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I mean, this is a personal view, but suspensions, if they are the way forward in the future, need to be done with a purpose. So there's no point just viewing it as a punishment. You know, you won't darken our doors for 6 months, but then apparently you can come back and be a fully functioning member again. It would only make sense in the sense of a pathway towards returning as a fully functioning, contributing member. And so I'm very cautious about this being seen in isolation simply as a punishment. The other side to it is that, and this is mentioned in the questions that are being asked, is interim suspensions, because in some circumstances where the complaint is so serious, perhaps involving assault, maybe there's a police investigation undergoing, and common sense must be that that person would be suspended on an interim basis immediately, because you'd want to protect the public or the victim. So these are really complicated issues. So I think we've just got to be careful to pull apart the need to say yes, because it is right probably that this is something that should be opened up as a way forward, because we all know that at the moment a councillor that is genuinely transgressing and will do nothing about it, there is insufficient sanction. And what on earth do you do short of some kind of mechanism such as suspension? But the suspension comes with all sorts of bigger issues, which a fuller consultation in the future will be able to pick up, but we can't really build in at this stage. And I hope those comments are just some general help.
Thank you very much, Martin. I mean, I completely take on board your point, Jess, which is that in trying to tackle better poor behaviour, we may end up handing toolkits to people who want to make specious and completely unfounded allegations in order to cause harm to elected members. So how can we strike a better balance maybe in our response? Was this an open text box?
No.
No, okay.
I totally understand all of the points. I totally get them all. I'm just wondering whether you want me to try and weave into anywhere that I can get it in, really. Something about, you know, how the issue around the power to suspend members is a very complex issue that needs very careful handling and very clear criteria. And then I just put that in somewhere to cover it, because I totally agree. I mean, in the 20 years that I've been dealing with code of conduct complaints, I can only think of one, possibly two examples where suspension might have even been relevant. It's going to be so rare, but the significance of it is, you know, is big. So we do need very, very robust criteria in those. So I totally understand the sentiments of the committee.
Particularly as we work in a highly politicised environment, generally as members, where certain people may have tools at their disposal that we don't have at our disposal, such as, you know, the example that Pauline cited, where a member of the public is able to use the press to pursue their complaint effectively in an unfounded fashion. It is complicated. Right, who do we have next?
Well, on this point, Ken's put his hand up.
Okay, Ken, was it on this specific point?
And then I'd like to, and Robert.
Yes, but I think I'm reiterating what we're already saying. I think the devil's in the detail here, and this process isn't allowing us to drill down into the detail we'd like to go into. But maybe there's a way, as Melanie's been saying, of building in some sort of caveats around this, so we're flagging up the issues that we really need to get under if we're going to have a process that reassures people and works effectively.
Thank you, Ken. Who was next?
It was me and then Robert.
Okay, and then John and then Robert, please. John first.
Just if we're talking around the issue of suspension, and I hear and understand the concerns that have been raised, I'm afraid I come at it, the analogy that I've applied throughout looking at this issue of responding to the questionnaire and this specific point is how one would deal with it as an employer with an employer. I know it's not exactly the same, but there are good reasons why an employer suspends an employee, and they should not do that in order to signify guilt or a decision, but it is in extreme circumstances in order to create an environment where everybody can continue to work safely. And therefore, in some ways, I come at looking at this that if you've got the right criteria that have to be applied, then I personally see no reason why it cannot be an internal matter that a council can suspend someone. And we've already made the point that it should be, we think there should be an external appeals mechanism, which means that if you then end up getting to a sanction imposed, you then have very independent eyes looking at it. So I get the point that's been made, but I still see there could be good reason. I mean, we had I'm not going to mention a particular case that we had, but we had an issue that has come up and dominated this council for quite a while in recent times. And I think if this council had the power to suspend in such circumstances, that might have been one where potentially it was applied. That's all I would say.
Although obviously we cannot ever preempt the outcome of investigations by other bodies. Yeah.
But I'm sorry, but you know, again, the analogy with employment is that you can suspend someone without affording guilt. And if you look at the ACAS code, it makes it very clear that that doesn't signify that there is guilt. You're doing it for good reason in order to protect individuals and an organisation.
And I think that's where the sort of the serious part needs to be better defined. Jess, is it on this specific issue?
Yeah, I have to disagree with John. I think it's fundamentally different being a councillor to being an employee. It couldn't be more far removed. And actually, in this case, suspension, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is really different because actually you're not suspending pending an investigation. Well, the main suspension. I'm not talking about interim suspension. You're not doing a suspension, no guilt. You're doing a suspension as a in effect punishment. So it's a bit different on that front as well.
Also worth remembering that our employers are the general public. So we have thousands of employers. We're sent here by members of the public, not.
You've got Robert.
Robert, you next, please.
Yes, sorry, just on this suspension subject. Melanie, I cannot remember. If a councillor gains a criminal conviction, does that disbar them immediately? It doesn't, does it? No, and I think, whilst I do understand exactly what the councillor was saying about malicious, this should be an ultimate sanction, not something that is wheeled out willy-nilly. It should only be rolled out after a full investigation and a standards committee or subcommittee hearing, and it should be only used for the most serious of instances. But unfortunately, the world is changing. You only have to look at national and international politics and how certain people behave. And, you know, in due course, as changing of the guard happens, I think it is perfectly possible that you will get people involved in local politics who have the same questionable approach to public service, shall we put it that way. And I think if you've got the situation where a councillor has done something fraudulent, as part of their business, say to do with the planning committee, the ability that all you can say to them is, well, I think you should have some training on that subject, even though a court of law has then convicted them, I think is just ridiculous that you wouldn't be able to do it. And actually, when you said the maximum should be 6 months, my personal view would be that it shouldn't be limited to 6 months in the case of, for example, a criminal conviction. There it should be, permanent and absolute, potentially. Again, subject to all the caveats and detail that we can't get into in a consultation response. But there are some things where effectively that would disbar you from carrying on. You'd hope that those would be extremely few and far between.
Thank you, Robert. I believe there is actually in national legislation, isn't there? I know that MPs, if they're sentenced to more than 3 months, I think it is, in prison, are barred from the House of Commons, aren't they?
So councillors, if they are convicted of an offence of 3 months or more imprisonment, the same, you're disqualified from being a councillor, but it's only on those so it could be something slightly short of that. So, there will be a lot of occasions where somebody's got a criminal conviction, but it's not, it doesn't tick that box, so therefore they still remain a councillor. So.
I suppose there are also things that are politically damaging, which might lead to them not being represented by their party, for example, because it would look too good on the opponent's leaflets.
On this, I think
Martin, is it about this specific thing?
Yes, it is.
Yes, still on the suspension.
I mean, listening to the conversation in this room today about this, it could be that the focus is just wrong, and that the suspension of a member should actually only take place in 2 circumstances. One, alluding to the point I made earlier about such an extraordinary occasion where there's been violence used against a member of the public or another member, and the police are investigating, and I'm sure any right-minded person would say that member should be suspended while that investigation takes place. That will almost never happen. But if it did, that would seem the right thing to do. And the other occasion, and we have had it here in East Devon, is where all the complaints have been made, all the inquiries have been made, leading up to some form of investigation, to a conclusion, and the member refuses to comply. They won't apologise, they won't attend the training, and that's not good enough, and the public will not understand why that member has no sanction against them. And a suspension in that case seems entirely appropriate, but again, it will very rarely happen. And perhaps that's where the focus should be, on something that does need some action to stop an unusual and unacceptable state of affairs, but otherwise don't use a suspension because it's not a very good tool. And as I said earlier, it would only really make sense if it helps that member back to being the fully functioning member of an authority, firing on all cylinders, doing what we would all wish them to do and the public would wish them to do. And the blunt instrument of a suspension is probably not the right tool to do that, to be honest, unless it's associated with some practical measures to somehow support and induce that member to comply in the future. But whether suspending for 3 months or 6 months is going to make any difference,
Thank
I have no
you.
idea, probably not.
Thank you, Martin. So I think you favour the rehabilitative model of justice rather than retributive, which some other people do. Yes, I was going to, Pat, you're next.
Exciting topic of voting rights. So we're on to.
Are we off standard? Are we off a
So it's-
suspension?
We're off suspension.
Okay, no, can we kind of pause you for a second, please, and just double check that nobody else wants to talk about suspension before we move on to your topic? Tim? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Yeah, I just wanted to support John in his analogy of the employment analogy, because I think that's very important, in particular on the interim suspension. And I also wanted to mention that when the National Standards Board was abolished, one of the key movements against it was because people were saying things were politically motivated, and 2 or 3 of the political parties supported dropping it. And what they said was, when you are elected, either as a councillor or as an MP, you are elected by the people, which is something you were alluding to a minute ago. I take the view that when you are doing things within your elected circle, if you like, the people out there don't generally know the detailed circumstances. And so it is only right that either a standards committee or an investigation or a national body or appeals process is relevant to this, because just putting it to the electorate at the next election or whatever, are you going to re-elect so-and-so because they may be popular because they've opened their mouths a lot or whatever, I don't think is an adequate method of dealing with the travesties that some councillors can get away with. And that's my feeling generally on it. I do appreciate what Jess says in terms of difference between interim and full suspension, but I would support them both.
Thanks, Tim. I think John might have a suggestion on this. John?
I'm just wondering whether moving on and hoping that we take an agreed view that suspension might be appropriate at a point, is that we make a suggestion in 2 ways. One is you have interim suspension, and that should be considered against a criteria, a list of and I'm afraid I'm going to use the same analogy, in the same way as an employer would have potentially for issues that they might consider suspending someone for. So it's not going to be for taking a bag of paper clips home, So you have a list of potential what one might call gross misconduct in an employment situation, as opposed to misconduct. So I would suggest that there was a set of criteria against which you have to very clearly determine for interim suspension. And then if you're giving suspension as a sanction, then it is again in certain circumstances. So again, it can't be just because you I don't know, something very minor that a councillor did, that deserves a slap on the wrist. So I'm not being elegant in how I'm explaining it, Chair, but
I think
I'm running out of words.
I think it goes back to what we said earlier about the devil being in the detail, and actually needing a better definition of what a serious code of conduct breach actually is or means. Ken, is it about this still?
Yes.
Yes, please come
But
in.
I think it's these, you know, we're identifying lots of issues that are spinning off here. And, you know, there are comments here about what would constituents be told. And, you know, that raises a concern in my mind in terms of being very clear before we make a decision about suspension. And then how would that be handled? Now, I might be diving into detail here, but I think it's flagging up issues of concern for me that if you're not, you know, as John is rightly saying, suspension is not prejudging the outcome, but you then put information out to constituents that a councillor is suspended, that concerns me. To actually come back from that position if the outcome is ultimately, oh, there's no problem here, problem's gone away.
So
there's a lot of information out in the public domain by that point.
Absolutely. So we need more detail on when it might apply. Serena wishes to come in. Serena, do you want to respond to Ken first?
No,
or?
it's fine.
Serena, it's still on this, isn't it? Okay.
I just wanted to add, it's also quite difficult if it's a complaint, a councillor on councillor, because under the code, you're supposed to keep any investigation, any inquiries strictly confidential. So how would you explain it to the rest of your colleagues? Well, I won't see you for 6 months and I can't explain why. It is a very difficult thing. And I do support what John says. Having worked in the prison service, we had gross misconduct and misconduct. So if you had an allegations of assault made by, for example, a prisoner against an officer, you couldn't just suspend them each and every time. You'd have to look at the criteria. You'd have to look as to whether the officer should be moved to a different wing or whether moved from that prison to an office situation. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had any prison officers. You know, that would have been the route that prisoners went down. So I do see that it's got to be measured against criteria that is easily explained to people. And I'd also just want to say, it says, if you're an elected member, have you been subject to the Code of Conduct complaint? And did you get sufficient support? And I think we need to bolster that side of it as well, particularly if, you know, I'm hearing that there's a number of us perhaps that have had complaints, and the length of time it takes, I think that is one of the most damaging, not just what the complainant says, but the length of time and what support you're given.
Thank you, Serena. So Mel, it sounds like the questions that we've been asked to respond to may be eliciting something that's a much blunter tool than we'd like. So I feel like we should probably reframe maybe one of the answers to one of these questions to try to capture some of the detail of what people are saying.
I suppose it would be really good because obviously there's been different views about whether standards committees should have the ability to suspend. So it'd be good to have a clarity on what the majority view of the committee is on that. But I think it's then about me just putting in a note where I can to say, you know, that it's a very complex issue, needs very careful handling, and we need very clear criteria, and suspension should only be used in the most serious of cases. So something along those words. So I'm more than happy to add that wording in if you feel that covers it. But I suppose the only other thing I need to know is, are we leaving the answer to the question as yes, standards committee should deal with suspensions?
So that is,
and there's obviously a mixture of views, and
that is the question that we have to throw out to you, the committee, really. Jess, is it about this specific thing? Yeah.
I mean, I think listening to everybody, I think I can see ultimately why it probably has to be there, but I'm just nervous about it just spilling into like, oh, they've said, you know, complaints about somebody saying this, and, you know, just snowballing into some, you know, getting out of hand. So very, very, very rarely I can see why it would be an appropriate remedy.
Thank you.
So hopefully, well, we obviously can't operate on a hope. It would be, oh, sorry, Pat, do you want to come back in?
Yes, because the voters' point also is relevant to exactly what you just said. So there are 3 points about voting rights for independents and the co-opted members. and it's in question 8, question 9, and it has a ripple effect onto 19. So in principle, I'm totally agreed to having voting rights, because I think that creates that degree of balance and that degree of challenge, and maybe even formalises it a little bit more, which addresses head-on that particular point. Question 9 talks about whether it should be who would be the chair of the Standards Committee, and the default answer or the answer that Melanie's suggested is that the vice chair could be an independent person. But I would ask, does that mean they would lose their voice or right to vote if they were to come to chair? And to express the independent view if there was only one independent in the room. So there's a little bit of devil in the detail.
Ooh, yes.
It's a detail thing, but it's...
Yeah. Okay.
And then
so,
the question 19 one was basically to say, yes, the Standards Committee should do that, but it would be helped by having the voting rights of the independent and co-opted members to create that degree of balance. So I think we can get almost to the point of we're stitching in a safeguard.
I mean, I personally would feel a lot more comfortable if independent members did have a vote and were, had the same voting rights as elected members.
Because it allows us to see that challenge slightly differently, if you like, or concern, rephrase it.
And because the value added that you bring is a non-involved viewpoint. Mel, did you want to say something about that?
And all I was going to say, the comments about who chairs and who's vice chair, clearly, you could flip that around the other way. You could do it in any sense. So obviously I appreciate the thoughts of the committee on that point.
Who was next?
Robert,
Robert, then Martin, please.
I don't know. I've just got a few questions. I'll probably just, if I quickly rattle through them and then. So on the voting, one was around the voting. Personally, I don't think independents should be have formal votes on the committee. I think that what gives us the power of that independence is that we are giving you a viewpoint, and it is the responsibility of the elected member, and in the case of the corporate judge, the monitoring officer, if we were to have votes, I certainly don't think we should be chairs or vice chairs or have the ability to run, because you've got someone unelected involved in what has an inherent link to an elected process. So that were my views on independence. It also said in several places, I think we just need to be clear in the response where we're talking about in response to a full investigation, as opposed to, so for example, question 7, you say, yes, decisions should only be heard by standards committees. Yes, in terms of full, I know that you mean full investigation there, but you could actually interpret the response to mean that the full standards committee have to see every decision, like rejecting it at stage 1 or whatever. And I think we just need to be careful. And there was one about should investigations of the conduct of members who stand down before a decision continue to their conclusion and the findings be published, and the proposed answer is yes. I would disagree with that, except where the matters involve the police.
This is question 12.
10.
Oh, 10? 12, surely.
Sorry, 12, I beg your pardon, sorry. Helps when one puts one's glasses on. The reason for that is that I could see a lot of cost and time being wasted. If a councillor, for example, if the complaint was they had treated another councillor with disrespect and they resigned because of that, would you really want stuff like that going, carrying on with the investigation to publish the response if they've resigned? I think the only time you would continue an investigation once a councillor has resigned is if it was of a legal police, safeguarding, that sort of issue. I could see why in those situations, but as a standard, I would question
And
the
really,
benefit
if
of
it
that.
were of a legal police nature, then we are not the appropriate body to.
No,
be
no, you have to
pursuing
wait till
that,
that's
yeah,
finished,
yeah.
but you would then, you know, as a wrap-up of that, you know, if has happened in this authority, a councillor, albeit not on council business, was convicted of a safeguarding issue, it is right that after that has been done and the, you know, the courts have delivered their verdict, that the public would have to say, well, you know, that investigation, where did that get to? That would be the only situation I could see why you would continue an investigation and then publish the result if they've resigned.
Yes, please, Mel. I'm just wondering how to
So,
tackle that without
It
getting
is
specific.
starting with question 7. The way I've interpreted that, and I'd appreciate other thoughts, is I think that's trying to get at whether it should be the standards committee that hear alleged code of conduct breaches once it's been investigated, or should it be taken by full council? Because there are a number of authorities since the Localism Act where these decisions go into full council. My view is, is that it should be the standards committee. So that's why I've answered it in the way that I have. But I'm just wondering whether I'm the only one interpreting it in that way.
That was what I would have said as well, that the alternative, the no, which Mel has struck through, is about decisions instead going to full council.
I suppose just as mentioned full council there, it goes on about you triaging.
In the
Question
no
7.
answer,
Yeah.
it says no local authority should have the discretion to allow decisions to be taken by full council. So that's the alternative to yes, they should go to standards committee. Again, maybe this question isn't very well phrased.
No,
maybe the
I think
standard
you're
pro
right.
forma answers are not very well
So-
worded.
So then moving on to question 12. That's a really difficult question, that one, because if I actually was just talking as a monitoring officer, sometimes, I shouldn't say this, but sometimes when a member resigns and you can stop an investigation, it's, that one's dealt with, we can move on. But actually then I was thinking about the wider context, that there are members that step down to avoid the code of conduct complaints investigation process and then get themselves re-elected, and the public perception of that. So I answered that question with that in the back of my mind. So that's why I answered it in the way that I did.
There is also a wider policy point, isn't there, about if that particular behaviour were not just isolated to that particular person, what message we wanted to send about that particular type of behaviour. So, I mean, I probably, as a local authority, we shouldn't be spending resources on people who are no longer members. But if there is a wider policy point to be drawn from carrying on with the investigation, maybe that's the right answer. I don't know.
I think it would be by exception rather than the rule, and that flavour didn't come out from the current response, I think, is my concern about it. And you could end up having, if you took it at its face value, you could end up spending an awful lot of time on things that I would suggest there's more important things to worry about.
I suppose the only answer I would give to that is if you're investigating something, it already signifies that it's quite serious, because otherwise it wouldn't be going to because I think this is talking about investigations rather than just the sifting stage. So by the very nature, it should be quite serious, the fact that you are doing a full investigation. So I suppose that was the context I was coming from.
And then my final item, which wasn't a specific question, was just picking up what was said in the previous agenda item about, is there any way of, because I think it's important that councillors who are elected have a certain amount of time to complete standards training, or that itself it would be considered a breach, and that they sign something to say that they will update that. I think that's important because you're almost, if a councillor is refusing to undertake the initial training, it's setting a precedent and a worrying trend before you even get out the starting blocks on that one.
I think that the consultation is aiming to redress some of the issues which already affect code of conduct matters. Martin, you are next, and then Ken, please.
Yes, in respect of the responses to question 8 and 9, which are both focused on the future specific role of independent persons and the cooperative members, I tend to Robert's view, which is that our strength is in our independence. It's in the title. And when we get drawn into actually having voting rights and becoming effectively a fully fledged member for the purposes of this committee, I think it draws us away from where we should be, which is, yes, we're part and we're a composite part of these discussions today, and hopefully we're adding some value, but we're also slightly detached. We're looking in somewhat and trying to think what is best, what would the public expect us to say as independent representatives on their behalf, which sets us into a slightly different position. So I would actually say, don't give us voting rights. Do what they do in East Devon, which I think is excellent practice of asking for a show of hands prior to the main vote being taken. I think that's rather good practice. I suspect it's a East Devonism, but it works rather well, actually. And the other point about it is in respect of process. If we've been uninvolved in the actual decision making, we remain free to participate in other functions on behalf of the standards function. So it could be to do with an appeal. It could be, in the case of the independent person or independent persons, the fact of being asked to give a view in respect of a new complaint that's come in, where I'm sure the independent person wants to, I would think, wants to remain detached and not get drawn into having their name associated with a specific vote on a matter involving standards involving a councillor member. So I can see practical difficulties if we are drawn towards being given voting rights. And I'm afraid, I think my view is the same, again echoing Robert, as far as chairing is concerned. It's initially tempting to say an independent person would be a really attractive way forward, because it sort of almost embodies the sense that we're trying to demonstrate that we want to take standards seriously, and it doesn't need to be chaired by a councillor member. But I think again, that's probably a mistake, because the independent person, as with independent representatives, need to just remain somewhat detached so that they don't become complicit. I'm afraid. I just think that's a safer way forward, even though it's attractive to just say, yeah, let's do it. I think it would go too far.
Thank you for that, Martin and Robert, because I actually think that, being elected members, we're all in favour of more democracy, but actually it's very refreshing to hear what you've just said. Mel, I know you wanted to come in on this, didn't you?
Yeah, and I didn't anticipate you saying that, I must admit. And I suppose just, and I think is a really good viewpoint. I suppose the opposite context I would give is before 2012, we did have independent members as chairs of standards committees, and it did work incredibly well, because the same skills that you bring of making sure that you're being independent in the way that you advise us, they were very independent in the way that they ran and chaired the committee. And I think where we had hearings, both the members who came and the members of the public appreciated the fact that the chair was independent, that they weren't an elected councillor, and it did very much work. But I totally understand the point you're making, and yeah, it'd be interesting to hear the wider discussion about how other people feel about that.
Thank you, Mel. Ken and then Diana, please. Ken first, then Diana.
Yes, just a couple of points from me to finish. The question 21 and also
Ken, sorry, can I stop you for a second? Diana, did you want to intervene specifically about the independence of independent? I'm going to ask Diana first and then come to you, Ken, then please.
Yes, I agree very much with Martin here. I think, again, there's devil in the detail on the voting bit. There may be some occasion when it would be appropriate for us to have voting rights, but generally I would feel that I would want to remain more detached from that. And I certainly, it's interesting you say that it's worked in other fields, because I think even being a vice chair wouldn't be really appropriate. So I tend to agree with what Martin said and won't go into the detail again.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you. So Ken, change of subject, I think, isn't it? Change of topic?
Timeframes. I just want to touch on two.
Do you have a question number that we're looking
yes,
at?
21 and 28 are
Thank
ones
you.
that it always concerns me when, I'm thinking from an employment perspective here, but when you start putting timeframes, how you word it so that your 6 months doesn't become, oh, that's the norm, because there is no norm here. Circumstances are going to vary so much, and I think 28 uses the word swiftly, and I think, you know, you would want some words in there to say suspension is a very serious matter, and the default should be that it's dealt with as swiftly as it possibly can be and doesn't drag on. It just concerns me about how we find the right balance about saying 6 months is a maximum. Just making sure that that doesn't become the default or cover situations where for some reason it might need to go beyond 6 months.
So like with speeding, speed limits are target, not a, sorry.
Yeah, it's finding the right words,
a
I
limit,
think, for
not a
Melanie
target.
here.
So maybe we need to slightly tweak that response so we give across the impression that we don't think every suspension should be exactly 6 months, but it should be up to a maximum of 6 months or something along those lines.
Yeah, it does say should set a maximum suspension of 6 months. I think it's just to prevent authorities from, imposing very, very long suspensions. But yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to try and get some wording in somewhere.
And I think
anybody's
28
got
refers to,
suggestions.
you use the word swiftly in 28, I think, which is
Yes,
it's
that
just
sort of covers it.
reiterating that point, really.
Yeah.
And then the other point was, I don't know here, you know, if there is the right to withhold allowances, how does that sit with not prejudging a matter? I know the comment was made before about returning allowances to people subsequently if there was no case to answer, but I don't know about withholding it in the first place. Is that act in itself prejudging?
It is a very fair comment. I mean, the principle of innocent until proven guilty is writ very large in our legal system. So how do those principles sit together?
I mean, yeah, I personally feel that it's something that you would impose as a sanction aligned with other things once you'd had that investigation, but that's just a personal view. But
so who was next? Oh, Robert, you are next.
Yes, I think on that specific subject, the view I would take is that if it's an interim suspension, then you don't, in the interests of, it's not about guilt, it's about protection, you wouldn't stop the allowance in that situation. Where it is a sanction and it's suspension, then absolutely. But by definition, you must, unless you happen to win on appeal, which hopefully would happen very quickly after the initial event, you wouldn't be subject to that unless you had gone through a full investigation and been found guilty in the first place. So hopefully the needing to give it back again would not become an issue unless, like I say, you happen to win your appeal, but that would be very quick.
Thank you, Robert. Pauline, is it just on the specific, because I want to try and wrap this up because we have a few more items to go. Yeah, just very quickly then, please.
What I was going to say is that if it takes up to a year and you've been through the actual festival and then you've gone to appeal and then it's gone to investigation, do you mean which part of it would you actually lose your allowance before you got it back again?
Yeah, so I mean, I feel that the government's trying to find better tools to tackle poor behaviour, but they haven't necessarily hit upon the winning
I
formula
think they're
yet.
effective. I'm assuming it would be about if you're suspending somebody or just suspended somebody, would you not take away their allowances for the period of that suspension? I think that would be the main type of situation where that would apply, but I totally get and agree with the other points that have been raised.
Yeah, so I hope that we don't end up in a situation that Councillor Bailey mentioned where people start to make more specious complaints because there are more teeth to them in future. So is it possible that we wrap up this item because we have 3 more items to go? So I think, Mel, you've had the flavour of what people are thinking and where their concerns are lying. So are we happy to ask Mel to delegate to Mel the sort of distillation of what we've said?
I'm just wondering,
into the
Chair, whether if it's delegated to me to to add some free text in the way that we have, and and also to change the answers to questions around the
And to
independence
circulate.
voting, and to agree those with you, the
Yeah.
Chair and
Oh,
Vice Chair.
yes.
To make sure that you feel that that captures
And that
the
we've
flavour
captured the flavour of what
the
people have
committee
said.
have been saying. If
Because
that's everybody's happy with that.
I'm just conscious that the deadline for response is well before our next meeting, so we won't have time to bring it back. So if people are happy with that as an idea, that with John and me and Mel, we get together and make sure we've captured everything that you've said this morning, that we can then respond within the deadlines. And hopefully this won't be the last consultation on this matter that there ever is, because personally don't feel that this is oven ready yet, to borrow a much misused term. Right, so
Chair, sorry
yes,
to
please, John.
We've been going now for almost 2 hours, and I wonder if you would mind asking the committee whether or not they want a 5-minute break or whether they want to just plough on.
Who? Okay, this is voting. You're able to vote on this. Who would like a 5-minute break now? No, I think we're ploughing on, John. Do you need a 5-minute break?
It's all right, I'll wait.
You just slide out. Just slide out. It's okay.
All right.
Go. Obviously, there is nothing to stop anybody from nipping off if they need to. Right. Okay. I've just been logged out because we've been on the same document for such a long time. I need to go back in now. Right, now then, so was there anything we needed to vote on this document, or are we voting on delegating it to the three of us?
Yeah,
Okay,
yes,
so if you, voting members, if you are able to vote on this, please, if you are happy to delegate the distillation of what we've been saying for far too long into these responses, would you please raise your hand now? Thank you. That's unanimous, I think, of everybody who's here. I'm not going to vote because obviously it's coming to me.
Thank you.
But it seems that the voting members are happy with that. So we'll probably circulate them before sending them out, won't we, as well?
Yes,
to make sure.
Yeah.
So before they actually get sent off, we'll circulate them. And if you spot any howlers that shouldn't be there, then please do say. Okay, moving on to agenda item 9, which is the Code of Complaints update. I was expecting Katie to be doing this, but I see that she is not here. So is that you, Mel?
It is. Yes, it is me. Yes, unfortunately, Katie couldn't be here today.
So we have a report and we have an appendix with the complaints, which is shorter than it used to be. So
shall I?
Please do. Can you just plough into this?
Yeah,
please?
absolutely. So this is your usual regular update, which is quite useful because we're obviously seeing the picture of an entire year, i.e. 2024 in terms of complaints, which, as you'll see, we had 9, which I would say is probably in about the region that I would expect, a reasonable number for us to have. We've had a couple of historic complaints that were before mine and Katie's time that we've now brought to a conclusion. So it's updating you on the outcome of those. And Katie has also very helpfully given you a snapshot of some of the inquiries that she personally has had since the last meeting, just to give you an idea of sort of the volume of them and some of the issues that have been raised in those inquiries. Just a caveat, that doesn't capture any discussions that I as monitoring officer or Anita as deputy monitoring officer have had with individuals, which we do tend to have in council chambers, in corridors and things like that. And we've not been as organised enough to capture those and get those into the list. So it's not all the inquiries we've had, but I think it's really helpful that Katie has pulled that together and has given you sort of an idea of the sorts of inquiries that we're getting. So that's a new addition, and we will continue to build upon that. And obviously, Anita and I will try and get better and try and input into that as well. Then at the appendix, we've obviously got our usual breakdown of numbers of complaints, so the 9, so 5 district, 4 parish. We've shown you, as usual, the areas of the alleged code breaches, from which you'll see that courtesy and respect and use of position have been the slight majority. They haven't got that many more, and bullying and harassment following in third place. In terms of outcomes, we've, at the stage 1, we've accepted 6 of the 6 and 2 adds up to 8, and we've had 9 complaints. I'm not sure why that's adding up in the way
There
that
is-
it is. So we've accepted the majority of complaints at that stage 1 process. But then in the vast majority of cases, we've decided that no further action should be taken on those, but we have sought informal resolution on 2 of those cases. And then there's a comparison on page 39 of the complaints numbers compared to previous years. So that gives you a good snapshot that, you know, hopefully we are very much going in the right direction in terms of the numbers of complaints and investigations that we have. But obviously it's important to emphasise that investigations are there to be done where we have serious complaints. It just happens that we've not felt that we've had anything of sufficient seriousness. So that's really just a snapshot of it, but I'm obviously happy to answer any questions that anybody has in relation to the report.
Does anybody have any questions? Diana, please.
Just very briefly, I think these are very useful. I thought the information about the inquiries was very helpful. I think you could just put it in landscape so people can read it. Only people with very short sight can read some of it. And I do think they need to keep to the same N throughout, because I think even somewhere else it said 10 and then it kept varying a bit. So,
yes.
I mean, it's too small to really give proportions, but at least we should have the same N.
Absolutely.
And explain, you know, have a missing for whatever.
And the more data we now build up, the more we will be able to do
it will get
comparisons.
much more useful as we go forward. But it's very. I'm very glad to see the improvements on the last page, on whatever it was, page 39, and that things seem to have been coming up much quicker and getting through, and mostly being informal resolutions for the kinds of complaints we've actually been looking at.
And we will continue to work on that and continue to try and get better on that as well.
Yeah, and I think clearly the general direction of de-escalating and explaining is working on the numbers as well. Martin, you're next, please.
Yes, just one suggestion to make for the main table at page 29. Would it be possible to add one further column in which said something like source of complaint, to differentiate between members of the public and a member, so we've got a better view of so it would be headed source of complaint, I guess, just to give us a better view of where these complaints were coming from.
So you'd want to see it either say district, parish, or member of the, or just MOP, member of the public?
No, it's the source of the complaint from a member of the public or from a member.
So yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Because the other source of a complaint could be from an employee. So
that's fine. Makes it even better.
Yes, but that might then get slightly tricky in terms of identifying individual, because particularly with towns or parishes, if it's an employee, it may well be the only employee. So we could get into territory of identifying individuals. So it's whether we just want to stick with whether it's a member or other.
Other, yeah, okay.
Yeah, does that work?
Yeah, that would work. That was inspired because in the response, the draft response you're doing to the consultation, there was a question about a breakdown between source of complaint from members of the public and from members, which you'd answered in there.
Easier to draw and less identifying at whole district council level. But if we're talking a granular detail, a parish council of maybe 5 members and 1 part-time clerk, it could get quite identifying. So we do have to be mindful of that.
Absolutely. And just to say, we want this report to evolve and grow, so very helpful. Very happy to put in an additional column. And any other thoughts on how we can improve things, we're very grateful to hear.
Thank you, Martin. Are there any more comments, questions? Are you happy? We're noting these, aren't we? Yeah. So we're just noting these and moving on. So thank you very much for that. And it's so brilliant to see it all heading in the right direction, numbers-wise, because it is a drain on resources, really. Right. Next up, we are, as I mentioned at the head of the meeting, we're going to swap over item 11 and item 10. So at this point, we're going to the applications for dispensations. Now, our three county councillors present who are dual hatters will not be able to vote on these, but they are able to take part in the debate.
It might be easier for them to leave personally. I think it's safer for you as members that you'll seek to do that.
Does this mean that we are then not quorate for the subsequent bit of the meeting?
We knew that anyway.
That's true. That is
so
true.
we
Yes.
were going to only note it. There's the
thank you very
independent
much, Jo
person. So
Hatters.
yes, we do need you back, please, for the independent persons item. So I'll come and get you when we finished, if that's all right. Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to now take what was item 11, which is the applications for dispensations. Melanie, are you going to talk us through this? Yes. Okay. So Melanie is going to talk us through this, and then we're going to have a little bit of talk about it, and then we'll be able to invite our county councillors back again.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm not going to say a massive amount because I think we had a very thorough discussion last week, but I think I'll say enough to obviously for anybody listening into the recording to show the sort of the rationale for the approach that I was recommending and obviously that you then discussed. So currently under the scheme of delegation as monitoring officer, I only have delegated authority to grant dispensations relating to quorum and political balance on a full council or a committee. These dispensations weren't relating to quorum because obviously we've got 60 councillors on and we've only got 7 that were affected by the proposed discussion at this stage. So quorum wasn't an issue. So because of the urgency, we had to have a very urgent council meeting last Thursday. Because of the urgency, we called an urgent informal standards committee meeting together, which many of you attended. So thank you very much for that at very short notice, to really give me a steer, because what it meant was I was getting into slightly political territory where I was considering whether it was appropriate in the interests of our residents as to whether it was appropriate to grant a dispensation or not. So basically we had that meeting. I outlined that my view was that we'd got applications in 2 sets of circumstances. First of all, dispensation applications from members who were also on the county council, and dispensation applications from members who were employed by another local authority in Devon who will also be affected by the unitary proposals. So in terms of the county council members, the view that I gave to the committee was that I felt because it was such a significant issue affecting our residents and that those members have been elected to this council to represent their views, and as they are only affected because they are on the county council, another role that they've been appointed to in the public interest, I felt it was appropriate to grant a dispensation in the circumstances to enable them to take part and vote. In terms of the employees of other local councils, I took a similar view on the basis that ultimately all staff will anyway chupi over to the new organisation. There's obviously a bit more risk at the manager level, but in general employees will chupi over. But again, those members have been elected to represent the views of their communities, and it feels appropriate that on such a significant issue that they should have the ability to represent those residents. So that was the view that I gave to the committee. Do you want me to say what the view of the committee was last week, or do you just want to open it up to discussion?
In general terms, I think we could probably do with you
absolutely. So the
telling us.
committee were very supportive of that viewpoint, and I therefore then went ahead and made the urgent decision to grant those dispensations, which I have the power to do under the Constitution in consultation with the chair of the committee. But I know that the chair was very keen that we should then bring it back into a formal meeting so that the views of the committee can obviously be known publicly, bearing bearing in mind that I was potentially getting involved in something that generally would be a decision that would be taken by this this committee. So so the dispensations were supported for a period up to the next district council elections, and the criteria that we used for that was that granting the dispensations was in the interests of persons living in the authority's area. So I think that probably covers it all, Chair, but happy
Thank you,
to
Mel. I
answer
think
any
it was worth
questions.
adding to that as well, that it is a situation that is under review as the situation with devolution evolves, so that it may be that other members, other elected members, come into the orbit of this dispensation. So it would need to come back to the monitoring officer, and then, you know, obviously be formally presented via our minutes, our standards minutes, to full council. Should the requirement be also on town and parish councillors, which it may happen at some point?
So I've had a number of queries from members. Some members have said, it affects all of us, you should grant us all a dispensation. Unfortunately, dispensations are only where under, you know, your declaration of interest form, there's an interest that arises, and just it affecting everybody doesn't trigger it. So I can't do that, but absolutely, I've advised everybody that they need to keep it under constant review. So, for example, further down the line where we have business cases produced for unitary, and we may have a number of business cases put forward, the winning business case, if it makes a number of proposals about devolution down to towns and parishes, that's when town or parish councillors may therefore feel that they need to apply for dispensations. But there may be other scenarios, and we'll have to consider it on a case-by-case basis.
So just to reassure members of the public and our independent members that we are constantly keeping this under review, because it's a fast evolving situation, and, you know, some of the parameters we don't even know yet. So we are keeping it under review. Now, we had two people who put their hands up. One of them was Martin and the next was Tim. So Martin first, please.
Yes, I mean, these changes, which involve potential devolution of power, local government reorganisation in the county of Devon and elsewhere, will change the governance for all of our residents, the governance arrangements, and potentially may have financial implications for them, because there could be some implications for council tax and the like. So I think a right-minded view would be that every elected councillor must have the opportunity to fully represent their residents, people living within, you know, their areas, as fully as possible during this period. And it couldn't be right to disbar some people from being able to take part in that process fully, which is why when we met informally a week ago, there was very strong support for Melanie's recommendations, which I fully support.
Thank you, Martin. Tim next, please.
Just to say, and I'm not sure whether our independent members got wind of this, but a proposal was made, and I supported that, which said that all of our councillors should be declaring an interest. And the reason that people, because there was some discussion outside the formal processes, if you like, and several people I know put forward the same view, and I tried to represent that in what I asked for. And the reason that we said it was because whether or not we have a business case currently for any particular proposal, all district councillors and all county councillors in Devon are affected by this. And potentially it means, from a pecuniary point of view, that we may lose our positions and our allowances, etc. So I think the public would find it difficult to understand that we hadn't been asked for a dispensation. And I fully support all of us being given a dispensation. How can we represent anybody if we can't speak in a meeting? That would be ludicrous.
No, I think...
Perhaps if I can
Mel,
just
yeah, please, Mel.
explain that. So when you're declaring interest, you are thinking about other bodies that you're on. The fact that you're a district councillor is not something for you to declare because you are a district councillor and that's what your role is. You're only considering other bodies that you're on that might be impacted by the decision, not your own body. So it doesn't work in that way in terms of the declaration of interest. So that's why dispensations aren't appropriate. And I know, I'm pretty sure, because I've had a lot of dialogue with the monitoring officers across the County of Devon, is most of the monitoring officers are all taking the same approach in terms of just dispensations, mainly for the dual-hatted members. So
Yeah, so I mean, a dispensation for every member is, I mean, if it's not the exception, then there's no need for a dispensation. And actually, for better or worse, this has become part of the work that this council is doing. So we have to tackle it. We can't not tackle it. We don't have that option. But thank you for that, Tim. Just quickly though, because we need to get the dual hatters
my
back in.
understanding wasn't on the body that you belong to, but about the fact that you had a real financial interest in issues,
Yeah,
and that I think is what.
I totally understand the point you're making, but of course the code only talks about close associations that you have with other people, any bodies that you're on. It doesn't talk about your allowances or anything like that, so you don't get to that question. So I understand completely the point, but unfortunately we can't apply it in those circumstances because under the code it's not a requirement for you to declare it in any event.
And we
say to independent members, I accepted, and I think all of us accepted your advice, your competent legal advice to do that.
I think it's worth noting that we're not actually voting on whether or not we dissolve this council, which would be the sort of crucial factor, because we don't have any choice over that.
It's a government decision,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah. Right. Does anybody else wish to speak on this item? Pauline, go for it.
Just apologise for last week. I was there, but I couldn't
We know
speak.
you were.
We could see you. We could see you. It's okay.
I mean,
Don't
I'm not
worry.
into Teams.
Don't worry. Thank you for your comments after the meeting as well. They were much appreciated. Does anybody else wish to comment on this? We're only noting this, aren't we? Because the decision has been made. But can we call in back our dual hatters?
John, I'll go.
That's all right.
Oh, John's closest. He's fine.
Chair, do you want to take a short break before the next item then?
Do we expect the next item to be large? We do need to take a short break because but they are going to be able to take part in the debate, aren't they, before they leave?
Your choice.
So I think we'll have the short break as they leave, as they leave. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Right, moving on swiftly to agenda item 10. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Which is the independent members of the committee, independent persons and town and parish representatives, which actually constitute a majority of the people on this committee. Right, now, handing back to you, on to Mel.
Thank you. Yes, as you say, we're in a really privileged position that we've got, such a large number of people who've been willing to put themselves forward, which I know from experience can be incredibly difficult to secure. So we are in a really positive position. Yes, this report is a number of our independents and one of our town and parish representatives is up for renewal in May in terms of their appointment. Obviously, the issue for the committee is whether you go forward with a fresh recruitment exercise or whether you renew those appointments. I am, because of the issues we've talked around just regularising the positions and making sure that we've got clarity over those positions, and to ensure, through best practice that we're regularly recruiting and making sure that we've got the best individuals on the committee, which I'm very confident that we do. I'm proposing that we go through a recruitment process between now and May, so we can appoint to the positions in May, to delegate authority to me in consultation with the chair to agree the recruitment paperwork. And if you're minded to go down that route, to request the committee to appoint a panel of 3 members for an interview panel to include the chair or vice chair of the committee. And one of the independent persons, quite representatives, very helpfully advised me, because obviously the last set of appointments were done before my time, is I understand that there was an independent person that's also assisted with those interview panels. So I was going to suggest that that may also be a good idea. Obviously not in relation to if they are one of the candidates, but for anywhere. So, you know, the independent persons could be the ones for the independent representatives and vice versa. So whether we also nominate one person that assists with that interview position as well. But I'll open it up now perhaps to the independents to make their comments and the parish representatives before we carry on.
Thank you. Robert first, please.
Just to say that whilst the paperwork was silent on term, it was certainly my full understanding when I was appointed that it would be for 4 years and then would be re-recruited. So I have absolutely no issue or no slight in what is being proposed. The only thought, and seeing Martin Sunder, was he made a good point as we were walking up here, is given the unitary discussions, whether you might like to consider exceptionally just continuing for another year until you know what's happening, rather than go through all the hassle of potentially recruiting new people, only to then find that that's all been to vain because of the changes. But obviously that's a decision and a consideration for yourselves.
Thank you for that, Robert. Diana next, and then Martin, please.
I did, you know, when I did look out the information that I was sent before I applied, we got appointment letters and confirmed when the council had voted for that. But it did say very clearly in the sort of information about the Standards Committee, it was for 4 years, but could be extended by the council if they so wished. So whatever you mean by extended is a devil in the detail again. And obviously that's for you to decide, but it definitely stated that, and I sent Melanie the picture of that page that I'd already kept on the application.
Thank you, Diana. Martin next, please.
Yes, I think my understanding from my original appointment was that it was a 4-year appointment, extendable by a further period of 4 years, which probably accords with good practice, because if people are there for too long, there is a danger that they become, groupthink becomes sort of part of their nature and they lose some of the independence. But on the issue that Robert's already raised, if power exists to do this, and it may not, to extend the periods of office of some or all of the relevant members we're talking about, that could be a simple and straightforward solution and would have avoided the need to go through frankly, an expensive exercise which could be avoided, but only if the power exists to do that properly within the rules.
Thank you. Pat next, please.
Well, I thought I'd join in. My view would be whatever is best for the committee and also best for the community. So whichever is the most effective in terms of demonstrating that we're running a proper standards committee. That would be one point, and I'll go along whatever it is. But also add the question of voting, non-voting, because that's a change that might happen in any period of term going forward. So you might want to build in a degree of flexibility just to second guess. But let's say it's back to what's best. And I'll support whatever.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you for that thought as well. Ken, please.
Just to say, I've got nothing to add. No, I agree with everything that's been said. And I've passed information over to Melanie that I hold.
Okay, thank you. Serena, do you have anything you want to add?
I know that my time's not up just at the moment, but it will be next year. It does seem more sensible for those who perhaps are up this year, because my conditions are the same as the independents. It was for 4 years. That could be extended under Article 9. You know, that could be extended for 4 years. So I think if it's within your powers, that seems a sensible solution whilst there's so much uncertainty.
Thank you, Serena. Pauline.
Yeah, entirely agree. I mean, it seems pointless if there's going to be unitary in less than a year or a year.
It won't be, yeah, I think.
You don't think it will be a year? Well, You don't think that this will?
They'll still keep the district going
Oh, I see what they, well,
until the end of the term.
I was going to say I was employed in exactly the same. But mine was in 2019 because of COVID, and we had nothing for 2 years. Then I'm still here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Jess, did you want to come in on that now? I think, do the independent members feel like they've had enough of a say, or does anybody want to say anything else? Well, I want to thank you so much for coming today. And now we're going to bid farewell to our independent members and representatives. I'm afraid that includes you, Pauline. You must leave. I think Pauline must leave as well. Pauline, you must leave as well, I'm afraid. You have to go as well, I'm afraid. And also Serena, I'm afraid, yes. So all of the non-voting members must now leave while we discuss the best way to move forwards with this. So thank you so much for your time. Shall we call a small 5-minute break for people who haven't had the chance for a break yet? Okay, so can we kill the live feed for about 5 minutes, please? Okay. 5 minutes. Be back here in 5 minutes, please, voting members. Non-voting members, thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much, everybody. We're back after a short break. Stuart, could I have your what's the word? Concentration, please. Thank you. Okay, so right. So we heard from the independent members, and we heard their balanced views. So what do you think? I'm opening up the floor, really. Jess, please go for it.
I'm very happy with all the independent representatives on the committee. I think they do an excellent job. I think the committee is functioning really quite well. So I would like to invite any independent members or the independent representatives or the independent people to continue on this committee if they would like to, but without being under any pressure to do so.
Thank you, Jess. So Mel, is it within your powers or our powers to...
It's an interesting
Microphone, please, Mike.
an interesting one because they all quite rightly referred to the fact that in their letters of appointment that it referred to an additional 4 years. That was in the terms of reference for the committee, but it no longer is. Now, I have no idea why it's no longer in there. Having said that, I think any standards committee has a discretion in which to extend appointments if that's what you would choose to do. So I can see no reason why you can't do that if you're satisfied that you feel that they've been through an independent appointment process recently enough that you're satisfied they should be extended. The reason why I was recommending a recruitment process at this stage was purely because, and I totally get the points that were being made, if we are going to go out for recruitment, now is probably the year. You're probably not going to want to do it next year or the year after because we will be in the midst of preparing for unitary. So I think this is the time that you would do it. If you're going to extend the appointments, I think you would want to extend them until what would potentially be the end of East Devon. So I think, you know, this is, if you want to go down a recruitment process, this is the window of opportunity to do it now. If not, you know, it's entirely within your gift to decide whether you want to extend them. Obviously, ultimately, council appoints. So, but there's no reason why, you know, that cannot be recommended through to council, and it won't be until May, obviously, when we do the annual appointments that would be picked up in any event.
Thank you. So, John, you want to come in on this, please?
All right, let me put a challenge then to this, and I'm going to start off by saying I have no issue with the individuals per se. So this is not about personalities; it's more about the process. We are coming to a point where it is we are going to disappear as an organisation, and as was evident by the last conversation. Before colleagues left the room, the timescale is unclear. The precise timetable is unclear. If we extend the term of office, then there's from what was said by one of the colleagues, that would then potentially take them over an 8-year period. And that's contrary to, well, yeah, that's contrary to the point that was made by one of the independents about that. I'm sat here and I don't know what length each and every one of them has served thus far. And that is my anxiety. I get the point about it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of expenditure, it's a lot of time in going through the process. But on balance, I was supportive of what Mel has put in as the recommendations because I felt it was the appropriate thing to do regardless of what's coming down the track, that we should be testing the market as we do for everything. And if the colleagues who are currently serving wish to continue and we find that they are the best people in our balanced view to be here, then I would be very happy for each and every one of them to continue, saying that without having seen anybody else. So that is why I supported and do support at this point Mel's recommendations.
So we have 2 proposals already. Ian, please.
Yeah, so of the independents, how many are near the end of their term?
Oh, all of them. Oh, right.
Virtually all of them. So they were all appointed in 2021. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
This is a very real and present
yeah,
situation
I mean,
right
my
now.
view would be the same. I'm very happy with them all, but sometimes fresh brains bring in fresh ideas. So I can see both sides of the coin. And how much would it cost to do the advertising? Is it just done through the LGA, or is it?
It will just be done on social media, so it will be on the website, social
So it's not
media,
gonna cost-
and in the newsletters.
The cost is not going to be great. So
It's member time, really.
There's a cost
isn't
in
it,
time,
the-
yeah,
in the term.
in our
well,
time, but that's
in that case,
as it
I'm
should be.
quite happy with what John's suggested, is to maybe look at alternative.
Jess, you wanted to come back in, please?
But I'm not quite clear, because I thought that the letters that were sent to everybody said 1 4-year term, which could potentially be extending. So that's all we're looking at doing, isn't it? So 2021 is only 3 years ago. So I'm not quite clear. Sorry? Well, coming up for 4 years. It's not 4 years yet. So I'm not quite clear why, if we've got that ability, we've got excellent and willing independent people, why we would, and I think probably, trying to get people on board as we're going into unitary, I think that, I think everybody's excellent, and I can't imagine that, I mean, maybe there are other people out there, but I'm certainly very happy as we are. Thank you.
I'm not sure it's about the people. I think we're all very, very happy with the people involved. It's more about the process, really. So Mel, what was I going to ask? I can't remember. Stuart and Tim, do you have anything you want to contribute or say?
The only thing I would say, if they've got it in their letter that we can extend it for another 4 years, well, I don't see a problem with it. But and I think that was the case. And I think I remember actually interviewing Martin Goscombe. I'm not sure, in my time as chair. Debbie would know. I did, didn't I? So he must be the one that's come in. Yeah. But apart from that, I mean, as for the others, I mean, perhaps it was only Martin. We've got to look to get another member. I'm not sure. Mel, what did you say?
Yeah, I mean, their letters definitely did say that there was the ability to extend them further. That was definitely in their letters, because I've seen those. But clearly, that's a judgment for the committee to decide as to which route you want to go down.
And Martin himself did mention the possibility of groupthink evolving. So it's the independent members are aware that there is a risk there of staying on for too long as the same group of people. Because that's the kind of independent-minded people they are. They realise that maybe there are some risks inherent in maintaining the same panel for a very long time. Tim, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, only to say I can see both sides of this argument, and while it's a good thing, I think, to stay within process, and if there's something's happened that Mel has told us that it's been dropped off subsequent advices or in the policy or whatever, then I can see an argument for going down the recruitment route. But on the other hand, broadly speaking, because we probably will, within the 4 years that we're talking about, probably will have got towards the end of the local government reorganisation, and for that point, I feel it's a good idea that we've got a good set of people and that we can carry on, and it saves you time, Mel, of actually going through all this procedure and doing it, and frees you up to do other things which possibly more useful in our current context.
Thank you for that, Tim. I mean, clearly we have a group of very experienced people who are exceptionally good at what they do. The risk that we have at the moment is that we don't know how long our district council will carry on for. So we don't know whether potentially extending them for 4 years takes them beyond the end of that 4-year term. We don't know that. And that is a potential risk involved, because it could take them beyond even the legality of keeping them on, which could mean that we'd be looking at recruiting independent members right at the very end, a few months before we go and turn into a dot. So I mean, that is something worth considering as well, because we simply don't know how long the district council will carry on for at the moment. We're having to make a decision now with not necessarily all the information to hand, but I do equally take on board the views that have been expressed by Jess and you, Tim, that we have some excellent people, and why not just simply extend them? But what happens if in 4 years' time, having extended them, we are still here and we then have got people who cannot stay? So is it not safer at this stage to go through a recruitment process and re-appoint appoint them?
Sadly, I think we will be gone by then. I think it's highly, highly unlikely. And if it is the case that this council is still in some way continuing, then we can re-recruit in 3 years or start looking in 3.5 years' time. But I honestly, with everything else that's going on, I think we've got an excellent team, and I just don't think it's a good decision personally.
We haven't made a decision yet.
No, I'm talking, if that's a decision the committee decides to make, I just think, oh, really? I just think it's a good committee at the moment, so.
And I take I take note of what you said earlier about obviously there is no compulsion whatsoever. If people for personal reasons wish to stand down, then we, even with your scenario, we can do a recruitment process for individual members. Right. Now then, so we know that we're able, this is a decision we're able to make constitutionally. This is a decision we have to make really in order to be in line with how people were appointed in the first place to the panel. There are possibly some people who maybe would get to the end, if they were renewed now, they might get to the end of their constitutional term of office. Am I right?
Yeah,
I'm not wishing to identify anybody, but I think there's a slight risk there, isn't there?
yeah, I mean, clearly some members have been appointed, from prior to the 2021. So some of the members have been here longer than that. So that's the risk. It's maintaining that independence, isn't it, really, in terms of... So
I have a question, I think, for you actually, Mel,
yeah.
before you switch off your microphone. There is a difference in how town and parish representatives and the independent members are appointed, is there not? Are they not put forward by their particular bodies?
So there are various different ways you can do it. So councils do it in different ways. So you can ask Devon Association of Local Councils to work with towns and parishes to put people forward. You can just advertise the position. Obviously, yes, I imagine towns and parishes will want to encourage members of their council to put themselves forward, but we would have applications from those individual members themselves. So,
okay. Thank you for that. So it suggests to me that there maybe is a member of this panel who maybe is in not the same situation as others, because many of them were recruited 4 years ago, and so they fall within the remit of this paper.
I think there are a couple of them probably, aren't there, that may have been here longer than the others.
I think it's 2.
Yeah.
But the rest of them are in the extended potential of extended bracket.
Okay. So did everybody hear that? So there are 2 members who maybe are not within the extendable period, and the others are all recruited in 2021 and therefore are able to be extended if that's the wish of the committee. Please.
Can I suggest that, I mean, we have effectively two different routes that we can go down. One is we just go out and recruit across the board, and the other is the point that's been put across, which is that we extend where we're able to. That's in effect as I'm seeing it. If that's the situation, can I ask Chair through you that we perhaps informally indicate which of those 2 options we would prefer?
Sorry,
Just
for sorry, when you say the 2 options, you mean the options for the people who joined us in 2021?
Of extending them versus go out and do the big bang, which is what is in the report. And just trying to get a feel, because I'm not clear what the majority view in the room is.
Yeah, Jess, come on.
Can I just ask you a question, please, Mel? So presumably, I don't know which stage any of our representatives are, how long they've served or anything, but presumably the committee, if it wanted to, could exercise its discretion and ask them if they would like to be reappointed, regardless of whether they're at 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. Is that correct?
Yes, you absolutely can. Obviously, what I would encourage you to be doing in that is obviously considering best practice, which is to maintain that independence, is that, you know, you regularly refresh your membership to make sure that they don't become non-independent. So there is no specific timeline, but yes, some organisations, companies and things like that talk about no more than 8 years, but it does vary from organisation to organisation. So we definitely in our letters said about 4 years plus a potential to renew for 4 years, but ultimately that is a decision for the committee as to whether you feel this is the right time to go out now, because a number of them have gone, come up to their 4 years and have done previous terms. Some of them have done previous terms before, or whether you feel that we should wait. So yeah, it's entirely at your discretion.
I suppose there are several arguments that are evolving from our debate, which is one of them is that would it be a waste of energy and resources at this point when we're trying to essentially wind ourselves up?
Yeah.
So that is a consideration, but should it be a consideration for the Standards Committee is my question, because the Standards Committee work will carry on until the council disappears.
Mm-hmm.
So do we want to have the best ship that we can? And I would hope that if we did opt for accepting the recommendation of Mel's paper, that we would very much hope that all the independent members who are currently on this committee would reapply through the formal channels.
And I suggest that somebody needs to put forward a proposal, and then you might want to
Right.
vote on it.
So
I was seeking to avoid this. I proposed what's in the paper.
okay, so we have a proposal from the Vice Chair of what is in the paper. Does anybody wish to second it? What is in the paper?
There we go. Got your answer.
I will second the proposal as long as we can make it quite clear to those individuals who that we will welcome their reapplication. in
May
some
I
way.
reassure you that I've already given that written
Wonderful.
Assurance that, you know, even if the members decide to go down this process, that we would be encouraging them all to reapply.
That's wonderful, thank you.
Could that be part of a proposal or not?
I think it's already been done, hasn't it? So
Right,
it's
right,
it's
okay.
kind of not needed. So I mean, if anything can reassure the independent members that actually it is really about process and not about them. I think it's the fact that they've already been asked that should we vote for this process, that they would be very much expected and hoped, it would be hoped that they would reapply. So I think we should put this to a vote at this point. So if you are in favour of accepting the recommendations on this paper, would you please raise your hand now? If you are against them, would you please raise your hand now? And if you wish to abstain, you please raise your hand now. I'm abstaining because I'm chair, but it is clearly carried.
Could
So we
you
will go back to a recruitment process, which will involve a few
Can
of
you
us.
note me that I don't agree with that, please? I think I've got a right to have that noted. Thank you.
Yep. If you want to be specifically named against that, that's fine. Thank you, Jess. So Jess Bailey voted against. Okay, so with that in mind, I think we have reached the end of our very long meeting, and thank you for your forbearance and patience and having to come and go. Thank you so much for coming, and safe trip home. Bye.